Hello everyone, I am MANO Scaling, and I am here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, please like the video and subscribe to the channel, and also tell me where you are from and what time you are watching. Now get comfortable and relax. My name is Samuel Morris, and I am 34 years old. This happened in the Black Hills National Forest of South Dakota last October. I still wake up screaming some nights, feeling phantom pains where my fingers used to be. I'd always been the adventurous type, someone who preferred solitude in nature over the chaos of city life. After my divorce was finalized, Rebecca claiming I was emotionally unavailable, I decided to take 2 weeks off from my job as a software engineer and disappear into the wilderness. I needed to clear my head, reconnect with myself, and figure out what came next. The Black Hills seemed perfect, remote enough to avoid tourists in the off-season, but with established trails so I wouldn't need to worry about getting completely lost. I'd researched an old logging path called the Hollow Trail that wound through a particularly dense section of forest. According to the few online forums that mentioned it, the trail offered breathtaking views and complete isolation. Exactly what I needed. What those forums failed to mention was the local legend of Hannah Blackwood, a woman accused of witchcraft who supposedly fled into these same woods in 1887. According to stories I would learn too late, she made a pact with something ancient that lived deep in the forest, something that granted her vengeful immortality in exchange for regular offerings. I arrived at the small ranger station near the trailhead on a Tuesday morning. The weather forecast promised clear skies with temperatures dropping into the low 30s at night, cold but manageable with my gear. I parked my Subaru in the nearly empty lot and checked in, signing the visitor log. The ranger on duty, a weathered man in his 60s with a salt and pepper beard, glanced at my planned route with a frown. "The Hollow Trail? That's a mighty long hike for someone going solo," he said, eyes narrowing slightly, especially this time of year. "I've done longer," I assured him, adjusting my pack. "And I've got everything I need: satellite phone, first aid, extra supplies. I'll be careful." He studied me for a moment, then grabbed a map and circled an area about 12 miles in. "There's an old fire lookout tower here," he explained. "If you get into trouble, it's got emergency supplies. But..." He hesitated, then shook his head. "Just stick to the marked path. Some of the old-timers say parts of these woods can play tricks on your mind when you're alone out there." I thanked him, assuming he was just being cautious with an out-of-towner. In retrospect, I should have asked more questions. The first day went exactly as planned. The trail was overgrown in spots but easy enough to follow. Fall had turned the forest into a kaleidoscope of reds and golds, leaves crunching satisfyingly beneath my boots. I made good progress, stopping occasionally to photograph particularly stunning vistas or interesting fungi growing on fallen logs. I set up camp that evening in a small clearing beside a stream, pitching my tent and building a modest fire. As darkness fell, I noticed how complete the silence was. No distant traffic, no airplane noise, not even much wildlife. Just the gentle gurgle of the stream and the occasional whisper of wind through the trees. I fell asleep feeling more peaceful than I had in months. The trouble started on the second day. I woke to a dense fog that seemed to absorb sound like cotton. Breaking camp took longer than usual. Everything felt slightly damp and my fingers were stiff with cold. The temperature had dropped more than forecast overnight. As I shouldered my pack and consulted my GPS, I noticed something odd. The coordinates didn't match where I thought I'd camped. According to the device, I was nearly half a mile west of the trail. "That can't be right," I muttered, tapping the screen. The GPS signal wavered, then settled on new coordinates entirely. I pulled out my compass as a backup, but the needle swung erratically before settling on a direction that couldn't possibly be north. Unease prickled at the back of my neck. Electronic glitches could happen in remote areas, but a compass malfunction was concerning. Still, I reasoned that if I followed the stream downhill, I'd eventually intersect with the main trail again. basic wilderness navigation. The fog clung stubbornly to the forest as I hiked, making it difficult to see more than 30 feet ahead. Trees loomed out of the whiteness like silent sentinels, their shapes distorted and stretched by the limited visibility. After what should have been an hour of hiking, more than enough time to reach the main trail, I still found myself in unfamiliar territory. The stream I'd been following had widened, its banks becoming increasingly muddy and choked with a type of reed I didn't recognize. The forest had changed too, the vibrant autumn colors giving way to gray, skeletal trees draped with hanging moss that seemed to absorb what little light penetrated the fog. By midday, I was forced to admit I was lost. My GPS displayed nothing but error messages, and my phone showed no service. Expected, but frustrating. The compass continued its erratic dance, occasionally settling briefly before spinning wildly again. The temperature had dropped further, my breath visible in small clouds. I decided to make camp early and reassess in the morning, hoping the fog might lift. I found a relatively dry spot beneath an outcropping of rock and set up my tent, gathering firewood while there was still light. As I worked, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Several times I stopped to scan the trees, seeing nothing but endless gray trunks disappearing into mist. That night, I struggled to keep my fire going. The wood, though appearing dry, seemed to resist catching flame, producing more smoke than heat. The smoke itself behaved strangely, curling in unnatural patterns before my eyes, almost forming shapes that disappeared when I tried to focus on them. I was placing another log on the sputtering fire when I heard it, a distant, high-pitched sound that might have been singing. A woman's voice, too far away to make out words but clear enough to recognize the rise and fall of a melody. My heart leapt. Another hiker meant potential help with navigation. "Hello," I called out, my voice swallowed by the dense fog. "Is someone there? I'm a bit turned around. Could use some directions." The singing stopped immediately. I waited, straining to hear any response, but the forest had fallen into that unnatural silence again. After a moment's hesitation, I grabbed my flashlight and stepped away from my campfire, shining the beam in the direction I thought the sound had come from. "Hello?" I called again. I heard singing. I'm not dangerous, just lost. A twig snapped somewhere in the darkness beyond my light's reach. Then another, closer this time. The sounds formed a deliberate path circling my small camp. I pivoted, trying to track the noise, but it seemed to come from everywhere at once. My hand trembled slightly, causing the flashlight beam to dance erratically across the trees. Then I saw her, or thought I did, a flash of pale fabric between trees about 50 yards out. A woman in what looked like an old-fashioned white dress, there and gone so quickly I might have imagined it. "Wait!" I shouted, momentarily forgetting my unease in the hope of human contact. "Please, I need help." I rushed toward where I'd seen the figure, flashlight beam bouncing wildly as I crashed through underbrush. The fog seemed to part before me, then close in behind, disorienting me further. After several minutes of pursuit, I stopped, breathing heavily, realizing I could no longer see the glow of my campfire behind me. Cold panic washed over me. I'd broken the most basic rule of being lost. I'd abandoned my camp and charged blindly into unfamiliar territory at night. I turned in a slow circle trying to get my bearings, but the fog and darkness had become impenetrable. That's when the singing started again, this time behind me. I whirled around, heart pounding, and caught another glimpse of white fabric disappearing behind a massive tree trunk. The voice was clearer now, the melody recognizable. An old folk song my grandmother used to sing, something about willow trees and lost love. "Who are you?" I called, my voice cracking slightly. "What do you want?" The singing continued, moving again, drawing me deeper into the forest. Some part of me knew I should turn back, find my camp, wait for daylight, but a stronger compulsion pulled me forward, following that haunting voice through the mist. I don't know how long I wandered, chasing glimpses of white and fragments of song. Time seemed to stretch and contract, minutes bleeding into hours. The fog thickened until my flashlight illuminated nothing but swirling gray. The singing grew fainter, then louder, appearing to come from all directions at once. When I finally broke through into a clearing, the moon had risen, casting weak silver light through a momentary break in the clouds. At the center of the clearing stood a crude cabin I would have sworn wasn't on any of my maps. A low, sagging structure with a stone chimney from which no smoke rose. The singing had stopped. Every instinct screamed danger, yet I found myself moving toward the cabin as if pulled by invisible strings. Its door hung slightly ajar, darkness beyond. The air around the building seemed different, heavier, charged with something I couldn't identify. My flashlight flickered, then died completely. I shook it, tapped it against my palm, but the batteries had failed. I should have turned back then. God, why didn't I turn back? Hello? My voice sounded thin and frightened even to my own ears. Is anyone there? I'm lost, and— You're not lost, Samuel Morris, replied a woman's voice from inside the cabin, a voice too similar to the singing I'd been following. You've been called. Ice flooded my veins. I hadn't told anyone my name since signing in at the ranger station, miles and days away. How do you know my name? I managed to ask, taking an involuntary step backward. A soft laugh, like dry leaves rustling. The forest tells me the names of those who enter. It's been so long since we've had a suitable visitor. The door creaked wider, but the interior remained impenetrably dark. My flight response finally kicked in. I turned to run, only to find myself facing an unbroken wall of fog, so thick and white it appeared solid. When I reached out to touch it, my fingers passed through, but an immediate, bone-deep cold caused me to snatch my hand back. It won't let you leave now, the voice said, closer now, just behind me. Better to come inside. We have much to discuss, you and I. I turned slowly, expecting to see some hideous apparition, but found myself facing a woman who appeared startlingly normal at first glance, perhaps in her 40s, with long dark hair streaked with gray. Wearing what I now saw was a simple white dress that seemed out of place in the wilderness. It was her eyes that betrayed her. Too dark, too knowing, reflecting no light despite the moonlight that bathed us both. "Who are you?" I whispered. Her mouth curled into something approximating a smile. Some called me Hannah in life. Hannah Blackwood. Now I'm simply the guardian of these woods. She gestured toward the cabin door. Come inside, Samuel. The night grows cold, and what roams these woods after midnight is far less hospitable than I. As if on cue, a howl sounded from somewhere in the forest. Not a wolf or any animal I recognized, but something that raised the hair on my arms and sent a primal jolt of fear through my chest. It was answered by another, closer, then another. Hannah's smile widened. My sentinels grow impatient. They do so enjoy the chase, but I've told them you're mine. For now. Left with little choice, I followed her into the cabin. The interior was larger than the outside suggested. Impossibly so. A fire burned in the stone hearth, casting dancing shadows across walls hung with bundles of dried herbs and things I couldn't, or didn't want to, identify. A large wooden table dominated the center of the room, its surface covered with bottles, bones, and a large, ancient-looking book bound in what appeared to be leather but had an unsettling texture even from a distance. The door swung shut behind me of its own accord, and with a soft click, latched itself. Please sit, Hannah said, gesturing to a chair by the fire. You must be exhausted after your journey. This isn't real, I said, more to myself than to her. I'm hallucinating. Something in the water or a mushroom I touched? She laughed again, the sound like breaking glass. How quickly you modern types turn to rational explanations. It's simpler than that, Samuel. Some places in this world are thin, veils between what is and what waits. This forest has always been such a place. The indigenous people knew it. The settlers learned it. Now you're learning it too. What do you want from me? I asked, remaining standing despite my exhaustion. Hannah moved to the table, her movements fluid yet somehow wrong, as if her joints bent in directions they shouldn't. Want? I want what I always want: company, tribute, sustenance. The winters are long, and what dwells beneath the forest grows hungry. She opened the ancient book, caressing its pages with fingers that seemed too long, the nails darkened like old ivory. You've been drawn here for a purpose. Every 13 years, the hunger rises. The forest calls suitable vessels, and they come, thinking themselves adventurers or explorers. Her dark eyes fixed on me. You're more suitable than most. Strong spirit, broken heart, a void waiting to be filled. My mouth had gone dry, heart hammering against my ribs. I'm not staying. In the morning, I'm finding my way back to the trail. Of course, she said, smiling again. But first, you'll break bread with me. It's tradition, and these old ways must be observed. Before I could protest, she had moved to a crude cupboard and retrieved a loaf of dark bread and 2 wooden cups. The bread looked normal enough, but the liquid she poured from an earthenware jug had an unnatural ruby hue that caught the firelight strangely. I'm not hungry, I said quickly. It's rude to refuse hospitality in these woods, Hannah replied, her voice hardening slightly. Besides, you'll need your strength. Dawn is many hours away, and the nights are seldom quiet here. As if to emphasize her point, something heavy thudded against the cabin wall, followed by a scratching sound like massive claws dragging across wood. Hannah didn't react, simply held out a cup to me. 1 sip, she said, to honor the old ways. I took the cup with trembling hands, bringing it to my nose. It smelled of berries and something metallic, copper or iron, blood. My stomach turned. What happens if I refuse? I asked, playing for time while frantically trying to formulate an escape plan. Hannah's expression darkened, shadows gathering in the hollows of her face. Then you leave me no choice but to give you to them. She nodded toward the wall where the scratching continued. They're not as conversational as I am. They simply tear and consume. It would be a waste of such promising material. I glanced at the door, measuring the distance. You wouldn't make it 3 steps, she said, reading my thoughts. The choice is simple, Samuel. Drink and remain my guest until arrangements can be made, or refuse and become their feast tonight. With no viable alternative, I raised the cup to my lips and took the smallest sip possible. The liquid burned down my throat like fire, tasting of wine, blood, and something else. Something old and rotten and wrong. Almost immediately, a strange warmth spread through my limbs, followed by a tingling sensation that settled into my fingertips. Hannah smiled, a genuine expression of satisfaction. There, that wasn't so difficult, was it? Now we can proceed civilly. My vision blurred slightly, the room seeming to pulse around me. What was in that drink? I managed to ask, my tongue feeling suddenly too large for my mouth. Just a binding agent, she replied casually, taking her own deep drink. Something to ensure you fulfill your purpose when the time comes. And what purpose is that? The words came out slurred, darkness creeping at the edges of my consciousness. Hannah set down her cup and approached me, placing one cold hand against my cheek. Her face shifted subtly as she leaned in, skin tightening against bone. Eyes growing larger and darker until they seemed to fill my entire field of vision. To feed what waits below, she whispered, her breath smelling of grave dirt and decay. With your flesh, your blood, your fear, but most importantly, with your choice. It must always be a choice, freely made. I tried to pull away, but my limbs had grown leaden. Through the increasing fog in my mind, I heard her continue, her voice seeming to come from everywhere and nowhere. But first, you'll serve as my hands in the world above. 13 years is a long time between feedings. I grow restless in my isolation. You'll bring me others, lost souls, wanderers. You'll be my sentinel until the next great hunger rises." The darkness closed in, her face the last thing I saw before consciousness fled completely. I awoke to birdsong and filtered sunlight. For one blessed moment, I thought the entire experience had been a nightmare until I tried to move. Pain lanced through my hands, and I looked down to discover to my horror that the tips of my fingers were blackened, as if with frostbite, and carved into each palm was a strange symbol that throbbed with a dull heat. I was lying on the forest floor, my camping gear scattered around me as if I'd been dropped from a height. My GPS and phone lay nearby, both functioning perfectly now. According to their displays, I was exactly where I should be, directly on the hollow trail, and only a mile from the fire lookout tower the ranger had marked on my map. Disoriented and terrified, I grabbed my essential gear and ran, leaving the rest behind. The forest looked normal in daylight. Autumn colors, vibrant, birds flitting between branches, no sign of unnatural fog or impossible cabins. Yet every few yards, I could swear I heard faint singing just at the edge of hearing, and more than once I glimpsed white fabric disappearing around a bend in the trail ahead. I reached the fire tower by midday, climbing its metal stairs 2 at a time despite my exhaustion. The small room at the top was dusty but undisturbed, emergency supplies stacked neatly against one wall. I barricaded the door and collapsed, examining my injured hands more carefully. The blackness had spread slightly, my fingertips now completely numb. The symbols carved into my palms pulsed in time with my heartbeat, oozing a clear fluid that smelled of the same metallic scent as Hannah's wine. When I tried to wash them in water from my canteen, the liquid sizzled and evaporated on contact. Night fell, and with it came sounds no national forest should produce, that same howling from before, closer now, circling the tower, scratching at the metal supports beneath me. And worst of all, Hannah's voice carried on the wind. "You cannot escape what has begun, Samuel. The mark is upon you. With every beat of your heart, my influence grows. Soon you'll understand your purpose. Soon you'll be grateful." I spent 3 days in that tower, watching in horror as the blackness crept further down my fingers, past the first knuckle, then the second. The pain was excruciating, but nothing compared to the visions that came with feverish sleep, glimpses of what waited beneath the forest floor, an ancient, patient hunger that had fed on fear and flesh since before humans walked upright. On the morning of the 4th day, I made my decision. Using the emergency first aid kit, I fashioned a crude tourniquet, and with the kit's hunting knife heated over a portable stove, I did what had to be done. The pain was blinding, but the alternative was unthinkable. I removed my own fingers one by one, at the second knuckle, all except my thumbs, which I needed to manage the descent from the tower. The blackened digits fell away, but instead of blood, they leaked that same clear fluid, which evaporated with a hiss when it touched the metal floor. More disturbing still, I could have sworn I heard each severed piece whisper Hannah's name as it died. I bandaged my mutilated hands as best I could and began the long, agonizing trek back to civilization. The forest fought me every step, trails that doubled back on themselves, sudden ravines appearing where none had been, trees that seemed to move when I wasn't looking directly at them. Several times I found myself walking in circles despite following a straight path. It was the symbols in my palms that finally showed me the way. Not toward safety, but away from it. They burned hotter whenever I moved toward the ranger station as if warning me. So I did the opposite, following the pain like a compass pointing true north. After what felt like an eternity, I stumbled out of the tree line and collapsed on the side of a rural highway. A passing trucker found me, delirious with pain and blood loss, and called an ambulance. The official report listed exposure, dehydration, and self-inflicted injuries consistent with extreme survival situations. A clinical way of saying they thought I'd gone mad in the wilderness and mutilated myself. Perhaps I did. That would be the rational explanation. But rational doesn't explain the dreams that still come. Visions of Hannah Blackwood and her cabin, of the ancient hunger that sleeps beneath the Black Hills. It doesn't explain why I wake some nights to find dirt under what remains of my fingernails, though I haven't been outside. It doesn't explain the singing I sometimes hear, just at the edge of perception, or why I've caught myself researching wilderness hiking forums, noting mentions of solo adventurers seeking isolation in remote forests. Most of all, it doesn't explain the new growth I discovered this morning. Small, blackened nubs where my severed fingers used to be, sensitive to the touch and throbbing in time with the symbols that still adorn my palms. I'm writing this as a warning. If you're planning a solo trek in the Black Hills, reconsider. If you find yourself on a trail that isn't on any map, turn back. And if you hear singing in the fog, run. Run, and don't stop until you reach civilization, because Hannah Blackwood is patient and the hunger beneath the forest grows stronger. And now, despite everything I did to prevent it, I feel myself becoming her sentinel. The blackness is spreading again, and with it comes knowledge I never wanted, of ancient pacts and 13-year cycles, of sacrifices and vessels and thin places in the world. Most terrifying of all is the certainty that someday soon I'll return to the Hollow Trail, not as Samuel Morris, but as something else entirely, something with blackened hands and a song on my lips, calling to lost hikers who stray too far from the path. And when that day comes, I pray someone stops me before I can complete what Hannah started. My name is Laura Adams, and I am 32 years old. This happened in the Superstition Wilderness area of Arizona, a place I once thought was just misnamed. Everything was Ethan's idea, as usual. "It'll be cathartic," he said, "a way to remember Dan the way he would have wanted." I wasn't convinced, but when you've been friends with someone for 15 years, you give them the benefit of the doubt, even when that doubt feels like a stone in your gut. There were 5 of us: me, Ethan, his girlfriend Cassie, my coworker Mia, and Mia's brother Jason. We had all known Dan in different ways. He was Ethan's college roommate, my ex-boyfriend, Cassie's childhood friend, and Jason and Mia had worked with him at the software company before the accident. Before Dan drove his car off Chapman Road last winter, drunk and devastated after finding out his father had terminal cancer. The Superstition Wilderness holds over 160,000 acres of rugged mountain terrain east of Phoenix. It's beautiful in that stark, threatening way that desert mountains are, all hard edges and plants that fight to survive. The perfect place, Ethan argued, to spread Dan's ashes on what would have been his 30th birthday. According to the map, Weaver's Needle should be visible once we reach the ridge, Ethan said, squinting at his phone. We'd been hiking for 4 hours and the mid-October sun was beginning its descent. Dan always wanted to see it. "That's what you've been saying for the last hour," Mia grumbled, adjusting her pack. Her dark hair was plastered to her forehead with sweat. "And we're losing daylight." "We'll make it," Ethan insisted. "Trust me." I didn't say anything. I just took a swig from my water bottle and tried to ignore the strange feeling that had been building since we entered the wilderness. A sense that something was watching us from behind the twisted saguaros and ancient volcanic rocks that dotted the landscape. We'd planned to camp at a spot called Fremont Saddle. But by the time the sun began to set in earnest, we were still at least 2 miles away according to Ethan's GPS. That's when things started going wrong. First, Jason's phone died unexpectedly despite having nearly 70% battery. Then, Mia's did the same. When Ethan's phone began glitching, the map distorting, the GPS jumping erratically, I felt that stone in my gut grow heavier. "We need to set up camp," I said, "now, before we lose all light." No one argued. We found a relatively flat area bordered by several large boulders that would block the wind. As we unpacked our tents, the temperature dropped rapidly. Not unusual for the desert in autumn, but it felt somehow deliberate, as if the cold was reaching specifically for us with icy fingers. "Did anyone bring the lighter fluid?" Cassie asked, crouched over a small pile of kindling she'd gathered. "It's in the side pocket of my pack," Ethan replied, hammering a tent stake into the hard ground. But when Cassie checked his pack, the lighter fluid wasn't there. Neither was the backup lighter I'd packed, nor the matches in Jason's emergency kit. Every single fire-starting tool we'd brought had vanished. "This isn't funny," Mia said, her voice tight. "Who's screwing around?" No one answered. No one needed to. We all knew no one had taken anything. "It's fine," Jason said, though the tremor in his voice betrayed him. "We have headlamps, and it's not that cold." But it was, and getting colder. We ate a subdued dinner of granola bars and beef jerky, huddled close together as the darkness settled around us like a shroud. The stars came out, brilliant and cold in the desert sky, more than I'd ever seen, but rather than beautiful, they felt remote and uncaring, like eyes observing our insignificance. "Maybe we should tell ghost stories," Cassie suggested with forced cheer. "No," I said too quickly. When everyone looked at me, I added, "Let's just get some sleep. We have a long hike tomorrow." I wish I'd never gone to sleep that night. In my tent, I tossed and turned on my sleeping pad, unable to shake the feeling that something was wrong. Very wrong. The stone in my gut had become a boulder. Every small sound, the whisper of wind through cacti, the occasional skittering of some desert creature, seemed amplified and threatening. I must have fallen asleep eventually because suddenly I was jerking awake to the sound of whistling. Not wind, not an animal, a tune, simple, almost childlike, drifting through our campsite. I lay frozen in my sleeping bag, straining my ears. The whistling stopped. Then, footsteps, slow and deliberate, circling the perimeter of our camp. My heart hammered against my ribs. I reached for my headlamp, but my trembling fingers knocked it away. I heard it roll to the corner of my tent, and I didn't dare move to retrieve it. The footsteps stopped outside my tent. The nylon wall seemed absurdly thin, offering no protection from whatever stood on the other side. I could see a shadow, cast by the moonlight. A silhouette of a person, standing perfectly still. Then a voice. A hoarse whisper that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. "Laura." I couldn't breathe. No one should know my name out here. "Laura, I've been waiting for you." The voice was distorted, unrecognizable, and yet somehow familiar. "We have unfinished business, don't we?" And then I knew who it was supposed to be. "Dan," I whispered, my voice barely audible. The silhouette didn't move, but I felt, rather than heard, a change, a shift in the air, like pressure building before a storm. "Let me in, Laura. I'm cold out here. So cold." "No," I whispered. "You're not Dan. Dan is dead." A soft laugh like bones rattling. "Am I? Then why did you bring me here?" "Go away," I said, trying to inject strength into my voice even as tears began to stream down my face. The shadow remained for what felt like an eternity. Then, slowly, it moved away from my tent. I heard those deliberate footsteps circling again, then stopping at another tent. Ethan's. I should have called out a warning. I should have done something. But fear had paralyzed me, turning my muscles to stone and flooding my mouth with the metallic taste of terror. From Ethan's tent came a startled cry, quickly muffled. Then silence. I lay awake until dawn, too terrified to move, listening to the occasional sound of footsteps and whispers that might have been the wind. When the first gray light of dawn filtered through my tent, I finally found the courage to unzip the flap and peer outside. The campsite looked normal, untouched. I stepped out cautiously, expecting I don't know what, but there was nothing unusual. Just our tents, our packs, the sad pile of unused kindling. "Morning," Jason said, emerging from his tent with his hair sticking up wildly. "Anyone else sleep like garbage?" One by one, everyone appeared. Cassie, looking pale and drawn. Mia, unusually quiet. And finally, Ethan, who seemed fine, completely normal. "Beautiful morning," he remarked, stretching. "Once we eat, we should be able to reach Weaver's Needle by noon." I stared at him. "Didn't you hear anything last night?" He frowned slightly. "Like what?" "Whistling, footsteps, a voice." Ethan laughed. "Just the wind playing tricks, Laura. You always did have an active imagination." But when I looked at the others, I saw it. A flicker of recognition in Cassie's eyes, quickly masked. A nervous twitch in Jason's jaw. Even Mia avoided my gaze. They had all heard it too, and they were all pretending they hadn't. Breakfast was a tense affair. No one mentioned the previous night, but something had changed in our group dynamic. We packed up camp in near silence, and when we resumed our hike, we spread out along the trail instead of walking together as we had before. Ethan took the lead, moving with purpose. Too much purpose, I thought, like he was being pulled forward by something other than the desire to reach our destination. Cassie stayed close behind him, constantly glancing over her shoulder. Mia and Jason walked together in the middle, speaking in hushed tones that stopped whenever anyone came too close. And I brought up the rear, watching them all, that stone in my gut now a constant presence. The landscape grew increasingly surreal as we hiked deeper into the wilderness. Rock formations jutted from the earth like the spines of buried giants. Centuries-old saguaros stood like sentinels watching our passage. The trail became harder to follow, sometimes disappearing entirely among the rocks before reappearing several yards away. "Are you sure this is right?" I called to Ethan after we'd scrambled up a particularly steep section that didn't look like any trail I'd ever seen. "The GPS is working again," he replied without turning around. "We're on track." But we weren't. I knew it with a certainty that defied logic. We were being led somewhere, but not to Fremont Saddle or Weaver's Needle. By midday, the sun beat down mercilessly and our water supplies were running low. The desert has a way of sapping moisture from your body without you noticing until it's almost too late. My lips were cracked, my throat parched. "We need to stop and rest," I insisted when we reached a small area of shade cast by an overhanging cliff. Ethan seemed about to protest, but Cassie touched his arm. "She's right. Just for a few minutes." We sank to the ground, grateful for the respite from the sun. As I took a careful sip from my dwindling water supply, I noticed something carved into the rock face beside me. Petroglyphs, ancient rock art left by indigenous peoples centuries ago, were common in these mountains. But this was different, fresher. The grooves hadn't weathered like the authentic carvings I'd seen earlier on our hike. It was a crude stick figure with elongated limbs and a misshapen head. Around it were symbols I didn't recognize, angular and threatening, and beneath it, in jagged modern lettering, "Daniel waits." I jerked away from the wall, my water bottle tumbling from my hands. "What is it?" Mia asked, startled by my sudden movement. I pointed wordlessly at the carving. They all looked. They all saw it. And then Ethan did something that chilled me more than any whispers in the night. He smiled. "We're getting close," he said. "Close to what?" I demanded, standing up despite my exhaustion. "Ethan, what the hell is going on?" His smile faltered, replaced by confusion that seemed genuine. "To Weaver's Needle, where we're spreading Dan's ashes. Are you feeling okay, Laura? You're acting strange." "I'm acting strange? Did you not see what's carved there?" I jabbed my finger toward the rock face. They all turned to look again, and I knew, from their blank expressions, what I would see when I turned back. The carving was gone. "There's nothing there," Jason said gently. "Look, it's hot out here. Maybe you're getting a little dehydrated." "I'm not dehydrated. And I'm not crazy," I snapped. "Someone carved Daniel Waits on that rock. We all saw it." "No one saw anything," Ethan said, an edge creeping into his voice. "Drop it, Laura." That's when I noticed something odd about Ethan's pack, something I hadn't seen before. A small wooden figure about the size of my palm, tied to one of the straps. It resembled the stick figure I'd seen carved into the rock, Elongated limbs, misshapen head, crude but unmistakable. "What is that?" I asked, pointing to it. Ethan's hand moved swiftly to cover the figure. "Nothing. A good luck charm." "You didn't have that yesterday." "Yes, I did. You just didn't notice." We stared at each other, the air between us charged with unspoken accusations. Finally, it was Cassie who broke the standoff. "We should keep moving," she said quietly, "if we want to make it to the campsite before dark." No one mentioned that we didn't actually know where we were anymore, or that the trail had all but disappeared. We just shouldered our packs and continued walking, following Ethan as he moved with increasing urgency through the wilderness. The afternoon passed in a blur of heat and tension. The landscape became more disorienting, familiar landmarks seeming to shift position when I wasn't looking directly at them. More than once, I could have sworn we passed the same distinctive boulder or twisted tree multiple times. "We're going in circles," I finally said aloud. "No, we're not," Ethan replied without breaking stride. "The trail just looks similar in places." "What trail?" I gestured to the bare rock and scattered scrub brush around us. "There hasn't been a trail for over an hour." Ethan ignored me, quickening his pace. The others followed wordlessly like sleepwalkers. That's when I realized what was happening. They weren't themselves anymore. Whatever had whispered outside our tents last night, whatever had pretended to be Dan, had gotten to them, changed them somehow. All except me. But why? What made me different? And then I remembered. Dan and I had dated briefly in college, but I'd broken it off after just a few months. He hadn't taken it well. In fact, his downward spiral had begun not long after our breakup. The drinking, the erratic behavior. I'd always felt partly responsible for what happened to him, even though everyone, including Ethan, had assured me it wasn't my fault. Was that it? Was I being punished for hurting Dan? For surviving when he hadn't? Or was I simply losing my mind out here in the wilderness, seeing threats where there were none? The sun hung low on the horizon when we came upon the cave. It wasn't large, just a dark gash in the side of a craggy hill, easily overlooked if you weren't looking for it. But Ethan walked straight to it as if he'd known exactly where it was all along. "We'll camp here tonight," he announced. "In a cave?" I said incredulously. "That's not safe. There could be animals." "It's perfectly safe," Ethan countered, "and it'll be warmer than sleeping in the open." I looked to the others for support, but found none. They were already removing their packs, preparing to follow Ethan's lead without question. "I'm not sleeping in there," I declared. Ethan turned to me, and for a moment I saw something flicker behind his eyes, something ancient and hungry and not Ethan at all. "Yes," he said softly, "you are." Fear crawled up my spine, but I forced myself to stand my ground. "No. I'm setting up my tent out here. The rest of you can do what you want." "Laura," Mia said, her voice oddly flat. "Don't be difficult. We need to stick together." "Yes," Jason agreed with the same strange cadence. "Together." They were surrounding me now. My friends who were no longer my friends, their faces expressionless as they closed in. I ran. I didn't think about where I was going or what I would do once I got there. Pure instinct took over, sending me scrambling up the rocky slope away from the cave, away from the people I had trusted. "Laura!" Ethan's voice echoed after me, suddenly desperate. "Come back. It's not safe out there alone." I kept running, my breath coming in ragged gasps, my legs burning with the effort. I didn't stop until I crested the hill and the voices faded behind me. Night was falling rapidly, as it does in the desert. I had my small day pack with a little water, a protein bar, my headlamp, and a light jacket. Not nearly enough for a night alone in the wilderness. But I couldn't go back. Not now. I found a small depression among some rocks where I could shelter from the wind and be hidden from view. As darkness enveloped the landscape, I clicked on my headlamp and tried to formulate a plan. The logical course of action would be to try to find my way back to the trailhead, but I had no map, no compass, and no idea which direction to go. My phone had no signal, and its battery was dangerously low. I was well and truly trapped. As if sensing my desperation, the wind picked up, carrying with it the same whistling tune I'd heard outside my tent the night before. I switched off my headlamp immediately, pressing myself against the cold stone, trying to make myself as small as possible. The whistling grew louder, coming from below, from the direction of the cave. Then voices, calling my name. Not just Ethan's voice now, but all of them. A chorus of flat, emotionless calls that sent shivers through my body. Laura. Come back to us. We need you, Laura. It's time to join us, Laura. And then a new voice, one that made my blood freeze in my veins. Laura, it's me. It's Dan. Don't you want to see me again? It wasn't Dan. It couldn't be Dan. Dan was dead, his ashes stored in the ornate wooden box in Ethan's pack. The box we'd come here to open, to say our final goodbyes. The box that I now realized with dawning horror might not contain ashes at all. I curled into a tight ball, covering my ears to block out the voices that weren't voices. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. Time seemed to distort in the darkness. Eventually, exhaustion overcame fear, and I drifted into an uneasy sleep. I dreamed of Dan, not as he had been at the end, angry, bitter, self-destructive, but as I'd first known him, bright-eyed and full of ambition, with a laugh that could fill a room. In my dream, we were sitting by a campfire, just the two of us under a star-filled sky. You should have loved me, Dream Dan said, his voice sad rather than accusatory. Things would have been different if you'd loved me. I did love you, I told him, just not the way you wanted me to. He shook his head. Not enough. Never enough. The fire between us flared suddenly, the flames leaping impossibly high. Dan's face began to change, his features melting like wax, reforming into something inhuman, elongated, misshapen, wrong. Now you'll love me forever, Not Dan said through a mouth that stretched too wide, filled with too many teeth. You'll stay with me in the hollow places beneath the mountain, where time doesn't matter and flesh never rots. I woke with a strangled scream, drenched in cold sweat despite the chill night air. Dawn was breaking, the sky lightening to a pale violet gray, and standing before me, silhouetted against the growing light, was Ethan. "Found you," he said. I scrambled backward, searching frantically for a weapon, an escape route, anything. "Easy." Ethan held up his hands. "It's just me, Laura. Just Ethan." But was it? The figure before me looked like Ethan, sounded like Ethan. But after everything that had happened... "Stay back," I warned. "Laura, listen to me," he said urgently. "Something's wrong with the others. They're not... themselves. I think it has something to do with this place, with what we came here to do." "What are you talking about?" "Dan's ashes. I don't think we should spread them here. I think we need to leave, now." Hope flickered in my chest, quickly doused by suspicion. "Why should I believe you?" "Because I'm scared too," he said simply. "Because whatever's happening, it got to Cassie and Mia and Jason, but not me. And not you. Last night you were leading them. You knew where that cave was." Ethan frowned. "What cave?" "Laura, I've been looking for you all night. We made camp by that cluster of saguaros, remember? You wandered off after dinner, said you needed some time alone. When you didn't come back..." Now it was my turn to be confused. "That's not what happened. We were hiking all day. You had that thing on your backpack. The wooden figure." "What figure?" "Laura, I think you might be suffering from dehydration or heat exhaustion. You're not making sense." I stared at him, trying to detect any sign of deception. His concern seemed genuine, but then so had the carved message that everyone later claimed didn't exist. "Where are the others now?" I asked cautiously. "Back at camp, waiting. They're worried about you." "Show me your backpack." "What?" "Your backpack. Show it to me." Looking bewildered, Ethan slipped off his day pack and held it out to me. It was just a normal pack, no wooden figure attached, no strange markings, nothing unusual at all. "Satisfied?" he asked. I wasn't, not completely, but I was cold, hungry, and desperately thirsty. And if this really was Ethan, if last night had been some sort of hallucination or nightmare, then I needed to get back to the group. "Lead the way," I said at last, "but I'm walking behind you." Ethan nodded and started back down the hill. I followed at a safe distance, alert for any sign of trickery or danger. The landscape in daylight was different than I remembered, less menacing, more familiar. Within 20 minutes, we reached a small clearing where Cassie, Mia, and Jason had indeed set up camp. 3 tents, including mine. A properly constructed fire pit with a small fire now burning cheerfully. Normal. Safe. "Laura," Cassie cried when she saw me rushing over. "Thank God. We were so worried." I flinched away from her embrace. "Don't touch me." Hurt flashed across her face. "What's wrong?" "Laura's a bit disoriented," Ethan explained. "I think she might be dehydrated. Can you get her some water?" While Cassie went to fetch water, I scanned the campsite, looking for anything out of place, anything to confirm that last night had been real and not a product of my imagination. But everything seemed perfectly ordinary. "Here," Cassie returned with a full water bottle. "Small sips." I took it cautiously, examining the seal before cracking it open. The water tasted normal, clean. "What happened to you?" Mia asked, her dark eyes full of concern. "You just disappeared." I didn't answer. Instead, I asked, "Where's Dan's ashes?" An uncomfortable silence fell over the group. They exchanged glances, not the vacant, synchronized looks of the night before, but the awkward glances of friends sharing an unpleasant secret. "That's what we need to talk about," Ethan said finally. "There's something I haven't been completely honest about." My muscles tensed, ready to flee again if necessary. "The thing is," Ethan continued, "we're not here to spread Dan's ashes." "What?" "There are no ashes. Dan isn't dead, Laura." The world seemed to tilt around me. That's not possible. The accident." "There was no accident," Ethan said gently. "Dan faked his death. After his father's diagnosis, after everything that happened with his job, he wanted out. A fresh start, off the grid. We helped him." I looked from face to face, searching for the lie. No, that can't be right. We had a funeral." "A small private service with a closed casket," Jason confirmed. "It was all part of the plan." "But why?" My voice cracked. "Why would you lie to me about something like that?" "Because Dan asked us to," Mia said. "He didn't. He couldn't face you, Laura. Not after how things ended between you." My mind reeled, trying to process this new reality. Dan alive. Dan abandoning his life, his friends, abandoning me, without a word. "So why am I here?" I demanded. "Why bring me on this trip at all?" Another uncomfortable exchange of glances. "Because Dan wants to see you," Ethan admitted. "He's here, in the wilderness, living in a cabin not far from here. He's been here for months, and he's different now. Calmer. He says he's ready to explain everything to you." "You're lying," I whispered, but even as I said it, I knew it was true. It explained everything. The strange atmosphere, the tension, the secrecy, not supernatural forces, just human deception. "I'm not going to see him," I declared. "I'm hiking back to the trailhead and going home." "Laura, please," Cassie pleaded. "At least hear him out. He's been planning this for so long." "Planning what? Some sick reunion? After letting me believe he was dead? After watching me grieve for him?" Anger boiled up, replacing fear and confusion. "No, absolutely not." "You don't have a choice," came a voice from behind me. I spun around. Standing at the edge of the clearing was a figure I recognized instantly, despite the changes. thinner, weathered by sun and wind, with a wild beard and hair much longer than he'd ever worn it before, but unmistakably Dan. "Hello, Laura," he said. I stood frozen, unable to process the sight of this ghost made flesh. Dan stepped forward and I instinctively stepped back. "Don't be afraid," he said. "I'm not going to hurt you." "You already did," I replied, finding my voice at last. "You let me think you were dead." I had to. It was the only way to become who I needed to be. As he moved closer, I noticed something odd about his movements, a strange, jerky quality, as if his limbs weren't quite under his control. And his eyes, they didn't look right. Too dark, too empty. "What happened to you, Dan?" I asked, continuing to back away. "I found truth in the wilderness," he said, his voice taking on a rhythmic, almost hypnotic quality. "I found what was waiting for me in the hollow places beneath the mountain." A chill ran through me, the exact words from my dream. I glanced back at the others, expecting to see alarm at Dan's strange behavior. Instead, they were watching with anticipation, forming a loose circle around us, blocking any escape route. "You don't understand yet," Dan continued, "but you will. The desert speaks to those who listen. The ancient ones who dwelled here knew secrets. Secrets about traversing the space between life and death." "Dan, you're not making sense." "I died in that car crash, Laura. I really did." His face split into a grin that was too wide, revealing teeth that seemed too numerous, too sharp. "But the desert had other plans for me." Realization dawned, horrible and complete. Last night hadn't been a hallucination, the thing wearing Dan's face like an ill-fitting mask, the thing that had been outside my tent, that had whispered my name. It had been real all along, and my friends had brought me to it willingly. "What have you done to them?" I asked, my voice barely audible. "Shown them wonders," Not Dan replied. "Given them purpose, as I'll show you." With surprising speed, he lunged forward, grabbing my wrist with a hand that felt wrong, too cold, the fingers too long and jointed in places where no joints should be. I screamed, trying to pull away, but his grip was like iron. The others made no move to help me. They watched with those same eager, vacant expressions I'd seen the night before. "Don't fight it," Not Dan hissed. "It only hurts if you fight it." Whatever courage I had left crystallized in that moment of pure terror. With my free hand, I snatched the smallest of my remaining weapons, a travel-sized bottle of hand sanitizer from my pocket, and squeezed its contents directly into Not Dan's two dark eyes. He shrieked, a sound no human throat could make, and released me, clawing at his face. I didn't wait to see more. I ran, harder and faster than I'd ever run before, away from the clearing, away from the thing that wasn't Dan and the people who weren't my friends anymore. Behind me, inhuman wails echoed through the wilderness, followed by the sound of pursuit, multiple sets of footsteps crashing through the underbrush. I didn't look back. I couldn't afford to. I ran until my lungs burned and my legs threatened to give out, following what looked like a game trail that wound down into a canyon. If I could reach the bottom, maybe I could find water. Maybe I could find help. Maybe I could... The ground disappeared beneath my feet. I hadn't seen the drop-off in my blind panic. A short cliff, maybe 15 feet high. I fell, tumbling through space for one terrifying moment before landing hard on my side in a dry stream bed below. Pain exploded through my body. Something was broken. Ribs, maybe my arm, too. I tried to get up, but my legs wouldn't cooperate. All I could do was drag myself beneath an overhanging rock, trying to hide from what I knew was coming. The footsteps slowed, becoming methodical, searching. They weren't calling my name anymore. They didn't need to. Whatever was hunting me wasn't human enough to bother with such pretenses now. As I lay there, struggling to remain conscious through waves of pain, I realized something. The wooden box that Ethan had carried, the one supposedly containing Dan's ashes, it must have held something else. Something they'd found or made, something that had allowed whatever resided in this wilderness to take hold of them, to take Dan's form, an ancient artifact perhaps, or something they'd carved themselves, like the stick figure I'd seen, a vessel for something old and hungry that lived in the hollow places beneath the mountains. I don't know how long I remained hidden. Hours, maybe. The sun climbed high, then began its descent. My mouth was dry as dust, my injuries throbbing in time with my heartbeat. I drifted in and out of consciousness, dreams and reality blurring together. In one such moment of clarity, I heard voices again, but different this time. Normal, human. Check this canyon before we lose the light. Copy that. Franco, take the east side. I'll go west. Search and rescue. It had to be. But how? Who would have reported us missing? We weren't due back for another day at least. With the last of my strength I called out, a hoarse croak that barely carried beyond my hiding place. It was enough. Footsteps approached, and then a face appeared. A middle-aged man in a search and rescue uniform, eyes widening as he spotted me. "I found her," he shouted over his shoulder. Then, more gently, "You're Laura Adams, right? We've been looking for you. Try not to move, you're injured." "My friends," I managed to say. "Be careful. Not themselves." "We found your friends earlier," he assured me, mistaking my warning for concern. "They're okay. A little dehydrated, confused about where they were. Said you all got separated." That couldn't be right. They weren't confused. They were changed. Possessed. Unless whatever had taken hold of them couldn't maintain its grip once they were away from that place. Away from the cave. Away from whatever vessel they'd brought with them. How did you find us?" I asked as the man, his name tag read Peterson, carefully assessed my injuries. "Anonymous tip," he said. "Someone called in, said a group of hikers was in trouble out here, gave your names, general location. Weird thing is, there's no cell service for miles." More searchers arrived, securing me to a backboard for evacuation. As they carried me up and out of the canyon, I caught glimpses of the wilderness around us. Beautiful, ancient, indifferent to human suffering. The Superstition Mountains kept their secrets well. At the command post, a collection of vehicles parked at a trailhead I didn't recognize, I was loaded into an ambulance. And there, waiting with blankets around their shoulders and water bottles in their hands, were my friends. They looked exhausted, confused, but normal. Human. When they saw me, their faces registered nothing but relief and concern. "Laura!" Mia cried, rushing over. "Thank God! We thought we'd lost you." As the paramedics prepared me for transport, Ethan approached, his expression grave. "Laura, I don't know what happened out there. None of us do. It's all a blur after the first night. The ranger said we were miles from where we were supposed to be, with no supplies, no water. If they hadn't found us—" "Dan," I whispered. "Where is he?" Ethan's brow furrowed. "Dan?" "Laura. Dan's been dead for almost a year. That's why we came out here, remember? To spread his ashes." "The box," I insisted. "The wooden box with Dan's ashes. Where is it?" A look of confusion crossed Ethan's face. "It's right here," he said, producing a small mahogany box from his pack. It looked ordinary, just a polished wooden container with a simple brass latch. "We never got to the spot, never completed what we came to do." The paramedics began to wheel me toward the ambulance. "Ma'am, we need to get you to a hospital," one of them said firmly. "Wait," I called to Ethan. "Open it. Open the box now." "Laura, this isn't the time." "Open it," I demanded with such vehemence that even the paramedics paused. Reluctantly, Ethan approached, the box in his hands. With careful movements, he unlatched it and lifted the lid. Inside was exactly what should have been there all along. Gray-white ashes. Human ashes. Nothing more. "See?" Ethan said gently. "Everything's okay." But as he tilted the box slightly in my direction, I caught a glimpse of something nestled within the ashes. Something small and wooden, partially buried. a tiny figurine with elongated limbs and a misshapen head. "Get rid of it," I whispered. "Burn it. Bury it. But not here. Take it far away from here." Ethan frowned, but before he could respond, the paramedics resumed their task, loading me into the ambulance. The doors closed, cutting off my view of my friends, of the wilderness that had nearly claimed us all. 3 broken ribs, a fractured wrist, severe dehydration, and numerous cuts and bruises. That was the official tally of my injuries. I spent 2 nights in the hospital before being released into my sister's care back in Phoenix. The others came to visit, bringing flowers and awkward conversation. None of them remembered what I remembered, or if they did, they chose not to speak of it. "Trauma can do strange things to memory," the doctor told me when I tried to explain what had happened. "Hallucinations aren't uncommon in cases of extreme dehydration and exposure." Maybe he was right. Maybe it had all been in my head. The whispers, the cave, the thing wearing Dan's face. A nightmare born of grief and guilt and the unforgiving desert. But I don't think so. 2 weeks after we were rescued, Ethan called me. His voice was strained, frightened. "I found something," he said, "in the box with Dan's ashes. A small wooden figure, like a doll, but wrong somehow. I don't remember putting it there." My blood turned to ice water in my veins. "Where is it now?" I got rid of it, like you said. Drove out to Bartlett Lake and threw it in. But Laura, ever since then, I've been hearing things. Whistling. Footsteps when no one's there. And last night I swear someone was standing outside my bedroom window, looking in. Someone who... He hesitated. Someone who looked like Dan. "Pack a bag," I told him. "Go stay with your parents in California. Now. Today. You really think... Just do it, Ethan. Please." He left that evening. The others too, once I'd warned them. Cassie went to her sisters in Oregon. Mia and Jason to their mothers in Texas. All of them far away from Arizona, from the superstition wilderness and whatever dwelled there. As for me, I'm leaving too. Tomorrow morning, I'm getting on a plane to Boston, where an old college friend has offered me her spare room until I can find my own place. I've already sold most of my furniture, quit my job, given notice on my apartment. But before I go, I needed to write this down. To make a record of what really happened, in case it isn't over. Because sometimes, in the dark hours before dawn, I hear whistling, a simple, childlike tune floating through my closed window. And sometimes, when I glance in the mirror, I think I see something standing behind me. Something with a too wide smile and too many teeth. My name is Robert Johnson, and I am 34 years old. This happened in the summer of 2024, during what was supposed to be a therapeutic solo camping trip in the remote wilderness of Colorado's Pike National Forest. I needed to get away. 6 months after my divorce finalized, the walls of my apartment were closing in on me. I'd been having panic attacks, the kind where your heart hammers against your ribs like it's trying to escape, where breathing becomes a conscious effort and the world narrows to a pinprick. My therapist suggested reconnecting with nature might help reset my system. "Find somewhere quiet," she'd said. "Somewhere you can hear yourself think." If only I'd known what thoughts would find me there. I chose Echo Canyon, an isolated area deep in the Pike National Forest. It wasn't on many tourist maps, which appealed to me. The ranger at the station had raised his eyebrows when I pointed to it. "Echo Canyon? Not many folks head out that way," he said, running a hand through his graying beard. "Trails not maintained regular. You, an experienced hiker?" I'd nodded, though my experience was years out of date. College mountaineering club and a few weekend trips before marriage, career, and eventually divorce had consumed my life. "Well, make sure you sign the registry," he said, sliding the book toward me. "Write when you expect to be back. There's no cell service out there, so if something happens..." I scribbled my information. 3 days in, 3 days out. Simple. Clean. restorative. "Oh, and watch for changing weather," he added as I turned to leave. "Storms come up quick this time of year, and if you hear anything strange out there—" He trailed off. "Strange like what?" I asked. "Just, folks sometimes report hearing voices, probably just the wind playing tricks. It's called Echo Canyon for a reason." He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. I should have paid more attention to that look. The first day was everything I'd hoped for. The hike in was challenging enough to occupy my body while freeing my mind. The air was crisp, the sky an endless blue canvas stretched overhead. Pine and spruce scented the breeze. My boots crunched rhythmically on the rocky trail, and sweat cooled pleasantly on my skin. For the first time in months, my thoughts weren't spiraling around the failure of my marriage or the crushing pressure at work. I made camp on a small plateau overlooking the deeper canyon. As the sun set, painting the rock walls in brilliant oranges and reds, I felt something close to peace. I built a small fire, heated my freeze-dried beef stew, and watched stars appear in the darkening sky. I fell asleep to the gentle crackle of embers and the distant whisper of wind through pines. I awoke to complete darkness and the certainty I wasn't alone. Every muscle in my body tensed as I lay in my sleeping bag, straining to hear whatever had woken me. The fire had died to nothing. No moon illuminated the night. The darkness was absolute, pressing against my eyes like a physical weight. There, a shifting of gravel. Something moving, perhaps 20 yards from my tent. My heart thundered in my chest. Bear? Mountain lion? My bear spray was within reach, but I remained frozen, afraid even the rustle of my sleeping bag might attract attention. Another sound, a soft, rhythmic scraping, like claws or fingernails dragging across stone. Then came the whisper. Robert. My name, carried on the night air, so faint I might have imagined it. Robert Johnson. No mistaking it this time. A voice, neither male nor female, calling my name with intimate familiarity. Sweat broke cold across my skin despite the summer night. How did whatever was out there know my name? Then I remembered the ranger station registry. Anyone could have seen it. Perhaps some local was playing a sick joke on the city guy alone in the wilderness. "Who's there?" I called, my voice embarrassingly thin. Silence answered. Complete, oppressive silence. Even the night insects had gone quiet. I fumbled for my flashlight, clicked it on. The beam cut through the darkness, illuminating the interior of my small tent. Nothing unusual there. With my heart still pounding, I unzipped the tent flap just enough to shine the light outside. The campsite appeared empty. My backpack leaned against a nearby boulder. The fire pit contained only gray ash. The light beam trembled with my shaking hand as I swept it across the site's perimeter. Nothing. I was about to retreat back inside when the flashlight beam caught something at the edge of my camp. A single footprint pressed into the dirt. A bare, human footprint. I stared at it, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. Who would be wandering barefoot at night in rocky terrain miles from the nearest trail? And how had they known my name? Sleep didn't return that night. I sat up, back pressed against my backpack, knife in one hand, flashlight in the other until the first light of dawn seeped into the sky. Morning made the night's terror seem ridiculous. The footprint, when I examined it in daylight, seemed less distinct, possibly just an oddly shaped depression in the soil. Still, uneasiness clung to me as I made coffee over a fresh fire. The rational part of my brain suggested turning back, but pride kept me from cutting my trip short over what was probably just my imagination combined with unfamiliar wilderness sounds. I decided to continue deeper into the canyon as planned. Physical exertion would clear my head. The trail grew more challenging as I descended. What had once been a clear path deteriorated into little more than a game trail, forcing me to scramble over boulders and push through dense underbrush. According to my map, there should be a pristine alpine lake at the canyon's heart, perfect for fishing and meditation. I'd come this far, I wasn't turning back now. By midday, the canyon walls had risen steeply on either side, reducing the bright summer day to perpetual twilight on the canyon floor. The air felt strange here, heavier, stiller. No birdsong broke the silence. Even my footsteps seemed muffled. I paused to consult my map when I noticed the first cairn. It stood about 3 feet tall, a stack of flat stones balanced with precision. Nothing unusual about a cairn marking a trail, except this one wasn't on a trail. It stood seemingly randomly among the trees. As I approached, I noticed unusual markings scratched into the stones, crude symbols I didn't recognize. 20 yards further, I found another, then another. They formed a line leading deeper into the canyon, away from my intended route to the lake. Curiosity got the better of me. I followed the cairns. After half a mile, they led me to a small clearing. At its center stood the remains of a cabin, little more than a stone foundation, a crumbling chimney, and rot-blackened timbers. The roof had long since collapsed inward. Nature was reclaiming whatever human presence had once existed here. I approached cautiously, wondering who had lived so deep in the wilderness and why. The cabin's single door frame stood empty, a dark rectangle leading into shadow. A crow suddenly launched from the chimney, its harsh cry echoing against the canyon walls, startling me badly. Telling myself there was nothing to fear from an abandoned ruin, I ducked through the doorway. The interior was mostly rubble. Fallen roof beams, rotted floorboards, leaves blown in over countless seasons. Sunlight penetrated through gaps in the walls, casting dusty beams across the decay. In the back corner, something had been protected from the elements. A small table, still intact, held what appeared to be a leather-bound book and a collection of small objects. Moving closer, I saw they were bones. Small animal bones arranged in a precise pattern around the book. I should have left immediately. Every instinct screamed danger. Instead, drawn by a compulsion I couldn't explain, I reached for the book. Its cover was stiff and cracked with age. No title marked its spine or cover. Opening it released the musty odor of decaying paper and something else, a sweet, coppery smell that made my stomach turn. The pages contained handwritten text. The ink faded to brown. The handwriting started neat but deteriorated as the pages progressed, becoming increasingly frantic and jagged. I flipped to a random page and read, August 14th, 1888. It speaks to me from the shadows now. No longer content to whisper in dreams, Eleanor says I imagine things, says the isolation has affected my mind. Perhaps she's right. But how then does she explain the stones that move in the night? The scratching at our door, the way the fire dims when it draws near? Eleanor fears for the children, says we must leave before winter, but it doesn't want us to leave. It has tasted us now. I turned more pages, skimming entries that documented a settler family's descent into paranoia and fear. The writer, a man named Thomas Blackwood, had brought his wife and 2 children to establish a homestead in the canyon. The early entries spoke of the land's beauty and promise, but soon turned darker. He wrote of voices in the wind, of his children speaking to something he couldn't see, of livestock found mutilated. His wife Eleanor grew increasingly desperate to leave, while Thomas became obsessed with what he called the Hollow One that he believed inhabited the canyon. The final entry chilled my blood. November 2nd, 1888. Eleanor took the children and fled yesterday. I should follow. God help me, I should follow. But it has shown me such things, such terrible, wonderful things, the secrets beneath the skin of the world. It has chosen me to prepare the way. Others will come. It is patient. It is hungry. I hear Eleanor calling from the canyon, but she left yesterday, with the children. I must go to her now. The entry ended there. The remaining pages were blank except for dark brown stains that I refused to believe might be blood. I closed the book with trembling hands, suddenly aware of how quiet the ruins had become. No wind disturbed the leaves. No insects buzzed. The air felt charged, as if before a lightning strike. A voice floated from outside the cabin, so faint I might have imagined it. Robert. I froze. Come see. The voice was lilting, almost playful. It sounded like a child. Against every survival instinct, I moved to the doorway and peered out. The clearing appeared empty, but at its far edge, just where the trees thickened, stood a small figure. A little girl in what looked like a white nightgown, her back to me. "Hello," I called, my voice catching. "Are you lost? Where are your parents?" The figure didn't respond or turn. Long dark hair hung down her back, swaying slightly though there was no breeze. "Hey," I tried again, taking a step toward her. "It's not safe out here alone. Let me help you." The girl began to walk into the forest, unhurried. "Wait," I called, hurrying after her. I followed the white flash of her nightgown between the trees. She always remained just ahead, visible enough to follow but never close enough to reach. She made no sound as she moved, no snapping of twigs, no rustling of leaves. The rational part of my brain screamed that this was madness. There couldn't be a child out here, miles from any road or campground. Yet I followed, drawn forward by concern and an inexplicable compulsion I couldn't fight. The girl led me deeper into the canyon, away from any trail. The forest grew denser, darker. I stumbled over roots and rocks, collecting scratches from branches, while she glided effortlessly forward. "Please stop," I called. "I just want to help." She paused then, at the mouth of what appeared to be a cave set into the canyon wall. For the first time, she began to turn. A rush of primal terror seized me. Suddenly, desperately, I knew I did not want to see her face. I didn't want to know what looked out from behind those innocent eyes. I turned and ran. Branches whipped my face. I tripped, fell, scrambled back to my feet. Blind panic drove me forward with no thought for direction. I had to get away. Had to put distance between myself and whatever waited in that small form. I ran until my lungs burned and my legs threatened to buckle. Only then did I stop, bending double, gasping for breath. When I finally straightened and looked around, my heart sank. I was hopelessly lost. The canyon walls rose around me, but I no longer knew which direction led out. The sun was lowering, yet shadows lengthening. I had perhaps 2 hours of daylight left, and no idea where my camp was. I tried to orient myself using the sun's position, then began hiking in what I hoped was the direction of my campsite. The sense of being watched prickled constantly at the back of my neck, but each time I spun around, I saw only trees and stones. After an hour of increasingly desperate wandering, I spotted a clearing ahead. Relief flooded through me until I emerged from the trees and found the cabin ruins once more. Somehow, I'd walked in a circle. The sun now hung low, painting the canyon in blood-red light. I needed shelter for the night, and despite every instinct screaming against it, the cabin ruins were the only option. I could use the remaining daylight to gather firewood. Fire would keep wild animals away, at least. As for other things, I tried not to think about that. I worked feverishly, collecting branches and building a fire pit just outside the cabin's doorway. As shadows consumed the canyon, I struck match after match with shaking hands until the kindling caught. The flames provided pitifully little comfort against the gathering darkness. I ate a protein bar from my pack, though hunger was the furthest thing from my mind. The fire cast flickering shadows against the cabin walls. Each movement at the corner of my vision had me jerking my head. As full darkness descended, the sounds began. First came whispers, too indistinct to make out words, but unmistakably human voices carried on the night air. They seemed to come from all directions at once, rising and falling like conversation just below the threshold of understanding. Then came the footsteps. Slow, deliberate, circling my position just beyond the firelight's reach. I gripped my hunting knife, though it felt useless against whatever lurked in the darkness. "Who's there?" I demanded, voice cracking. "This isn't funny." The whispers ceased abruptly. The footsteps stopped. Silence pressed in, somehow more terrifying than the sounds had been. Then a child's laugh rang out, clear, bright, and entirely out of place in this dark wilderness. "Go away!" I shouted, panic rising. "Leave me alone!" The laugh came again, closer now. My firelight dimmed, though there was no wind. Shadows deepened at the edges of my vision. Movement caught my eye. A small shape darting between trees at the clearing's edge. The girl again circling my position. I threw another branch on the fire, desperately trying to push back the darkness. The flames caught, flared briefly, then subsided to an unnatural low burn, as if something were suppressing them. Robert Johnson. The voice came from directly behind me. I scrambled to my feet, spinning around. Nothing was there, just the crumbling cabin wall. "We've been waiting for you." Every hair on my body stood on end. I backed toward the fire, knife extended before me. "What do you want?" I whispered. "To show you." The voice was inside my head now. What Thomas saw, what Eleanor fled, what the children embraced. A sound came from inside the cabin, a heavy dragging like something massive pulling itself across the floor. My legs trembled with the urge to run, but where would I go? Lost in unfamiliar wilderness at night, I'd break an ankle or worse. The dragging stopped. Silence stretched taut. Then came the screams. They erupted from the forest all around, men, women, children, screaming in agony or terror or both. The cacophony pierced my eardrums, drove spikes of pain through my skull. I dropped the knife to clap hands over my ears, but it did nothing to muffle the sound. Through tear-blurred eyes, I saw them emerging from the trees. Figures, dozens of them, moving with jerky, unnatural gaits. In the dim firelight, they looked almost human, but wrong somehow. Their proportions were distorted, limbs too long or bent at impossible angles. Their movements weren't quite synchronized with their bodies, as if whatever animated them wasn't fully in control. As they drew closer, I could see their faces. God help me, their faces. Some had none at all, just smooth skin stretched over bone. Others had too many features, multiple eyes, mouths that wrapped around their heads. One figure, a woman's body in a pioneer dress, had a face that seemed to ripple and shift continuously, never settling on a single configuration. At their center walked the girl. But she wasn't a girl anymore. Her head was thrown back at an impossible angle, her mouth stretched into a rictus grin that split her face literally in half. From that cavernous opening poured a black substance that wasn't quite liquid, wasn't quite smoke. They were 15 feet away. 10. 5. I broke. Abandoning everything, I ran blindly into the forest, away from the cabin, away from the apparitions. Branches tore at my clothes and skin. Unseen roots caught my feet. I fell, rolled, scrambled up again. Behind me, through the trees, bobbed the lights. Not flashlights, more like faint blue flames floating at head height, pursuing. I ran until my legs gave out, collapsing behind a fallen tree trunk. My lungs heaved as I fought to silence my breathing. The floating lights moved through the forest. Searching. I pressed myself into the damp earth, praying to be overlooked. Minutes stretched into an eternity. The lights drifted closer, then miraculously began to move away. My relief was short-lived. A hand, cold and dry as autumn leaves, clamped over my mouth from behind. I thrashed wildly, but the grip was implacable. Another hand wrapped around my chest, pinning my arms. "Shh," hissed a voice in my ear. "They'll hear you." The voice was human. I stopped struggling and the hand cautiously lifted from my mouth. "Who?" I began in a whisper. "Later," the voice, a man's, interrupted. "Follow me. Stay low." The hands released me. I turned to see a bearded man in filthy, tattered clothing crouched behind me. His eyes reflected the distant lights like an animal's. Without waiting for a response, he began crawling away from the lights, using the fallen tree as cover. Having no better option, I followed. We crawled for what felt like hours, keeping to the deepest shadows, freezing whenever the strange lights drew near. Eventually, my mysterious rescuer led me to a narrow crevice in the canyon wall, almost invisible unless you knew exactly where to look. "In," he whispered. The opening was barely wide enough for my shoulders. I squeezed through, feeling the rough stone scrape my back. The crevice extended about 10 feet before opening into a small cave. The man followed, his movements suggesting long familiarity with the tight passage. Inside the cave, a small fire burned in a stone-lined pit, its smoke finding some unseen exit. The space was maybe 15 feet across, the ceiling low enough that I couldn't fully stand. The cave's walls were covered in symbols similar to those I'd seen on the cairnstones. More disturbing were the bones. Animal skulls, deer, coyote, bird, hung from the ceiling on sinew strings. Larger bones had been driven into the dirt floor in complex patterns. The air smelled of smoke, unwashed human, and something metallic. "Sit," the man said, gesturing to a flat rock near the fire. In the improved light, I could see him clearly for the first time. He was older than I'd first thought, perhaps in his 60s, with a wild gray beard and hair that hung past his shoulders. His face was deeply lined, weathered by sun and hardship. He wore what had once been ordinary hiking clothes, now patched and repaired countless times. Most disturbing were his eyes, pale blue, bloodshot, and holding a fervent intensity that made me deeply uncomfortable. "Who are you?" I asked as he settled across the fire from me. "What were those things out there?" He studied me for a long moment. "Name's Weaver, Daniel Weaver. Been up here. Hell, lost count of the years now." His voice was rough from disuse. "As for what's out there, folks down below have different names. Skinwalkers, Hollow Ones, the old people. Doesn't matter what you call them. Are they human?" Weaver shrugged. "Were once, maybe. Now they're just vessels." "Vessels for what?" "For what lives in the canyon. The hungry thing. The patient thing." He poked the fire with a stick. "It was here before us. We'll be here after. Sometimes it sleeps for decades. Then it wakes, and it feeds." I struggled to process his words. "You're saying there's something supernatural in this canyon? That's insane." Weaver's laugh was a dry rattle. "Yeah, that's what I thought too. Came up here on a research trip 20-some years ago. Anthropologist, studying the disappearance of the Blackwood family in 1888. The name hit me like a physical blow. Thomas Blackwood. I found his journal today in a ruined cabin." Weaver went very still. "You read it?" I nodded. "Then you've opened the door wider. It knows your name now. It's tasted you." A chill ran through me despite the fire's warmth. "What does that mean?" "It means you're marked. Like me. Like anyone who learns too much." "This is crazy," I insisted, though less convincingly. "There must be a rational explanation. Hallucinogens in the water. Carbon monoxide from volcanic activity. Something." Weaver didn't argue. "Believe what you want. Won't change what's coming." "Which is what? Exactly?" "The gathering. It happens when the hungry thing has marked enough vessels, when it's strong enough to push through." "Push through from where?" "The thin place. That's what this canyon is. A place where the membrane between weakens." He gazed into the fire, eyes reflecting the flames. "I've been watching the signs. It's almost time. More activity than I've seen in years." "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. "Why help me?" Weaver was silent for a long moment. "Because I'm tired," he finally said, his voice suddenly old and frail. 20 years I've been dancing around the edges, learning its ways, staying just out of reach, marking the safe paths with my cairns, warning the few hikers who stray this far, but I'm running out of time." He pulled up his sleeve, revealing his forearm. In the firelight, I could see something moving beneath his skin. writhing patterns like worms or veins shifting independently of his body. I recoiled. "It got me 3 weeks back," he said matter-of-factly. "Careless. Let myself get too close to the cave." "Jesus," I whispered. "We need to get you to a doctor." Another dry laugh. "No doctor for this. I fought it, but it's stronger at night. During the day, I'm still mostly me. Nights!" He shuddered. "Not much time left before I'm just another vessel." "What can I do?" I asked, overwhelmed by pity and horror. "Take this." He reached into a small leather pouch at his belt and withdrew an object wrapped in cloth. Unwrapping it revealed a crude knife, its blade made not of metal but of a crystalline material that caught the firelight in strange ways. Obsidian, from the heart of the canyon. Only thing that hurts them. I hesitated, then took the knife. Its handle was wrapped in leather, worn smooth by long use. "There's a path out," Weaver continued. "Not easy, but safer than the main trail. They'll be watching that. I'll show you at first light." "Come with me," I urged. "We'll get help." Weaver shook his head. "Too late for me, but I can buy you time." He gestured to a small alcove in the cave wall. "Rest there. I'll keep watch." Exhaustion suddenly crashed over me. Despite the horror of the situation, my body demanded sleep. I moved to the alcove, where a bed of pine boughs had been arranged under an old sleeping bag. The cave's warmth and the knowledge that someone was standing guard allowed my defenses to lower just enough. I drifted into uneasy sleep. I awoke to screaming. Disoriented, I bolted upright in the dim cave. The fire had burned low, casting just enough light to see Weaver thrashing on the ground, back arched impossibly far, his face contorted in agony. "Weaver!" I scrambled to him, reaching for his shoulder. His hand shot out, gripping my wrist with crushing force. His eyes, when they fixed on mine, were no longer human. The irises had expanded to consume the whites, and the pupils had elongated to vertical slits. "Run!" he gasped, his voice layered with something else, a deeper, resonant undertone that made my teeth ache. "It's taking. Can't hold." His body convulsed again. The skin along his jaw began to split, revealing not blood and muscle, but a writhing darkness beneath. I stumbled backward, snatching up the obsidian knife from where I'd left it. Weaver's body continued to transform, limbs elongating, joints bending backward, that terrible split widening across his face. I ran for the cave entrance, squeezing through the narrow crevice as inhuman screams echoed behind me. Outside, pre-dawn gray painted the forest in ghostly light. Without Weaver's guidance, I had no idea which way led out of the canyon. A crash from inside the cave decided the matter. I ran in the only direction that mattered, away. The forest blurred around me as I fled. The sky lightened fractionally, but the canyon remained in deep shadow. Behind me, something emerged from the crevice, a twisted parody of Weaver's form, moving in a jerky, spider-like fashion that defied anatomy. I ran until my chest burned and my legs wobbled beneath me. When I could go no further, I ducked behind a massive fallen tree, pressing my back against its trunk. The obsidian knife trembled in my grip as I strained to hear over my own ragged breathing. Silence. Then a soft, scuffing sound, something moving over forest debris approaching from my left. I tightened my grip on the knife, preparing to fight or flee. But what rounded the tree wasn't the twisted thing that had been Weaver. It was the little girl. She stood 10 feet away, perfectly still, her white nightgown now stained with dirt and what looked like dried blood. Her face was still hidden, head tilted downward, dark hair falling forward. "Stay back," I warned, raising the knife. She took a step forward. Another. I said stay back. I scrambled to my feet, keeping the tree between us. The girl stopped. Then, slowly, she raised her head. What I saw froze the breath in my lungs. Her face was not a child's face at all, but a shifting, rippling surface like black water. As I watched, features formed in that darkness, eyes, a mouth, a nose, only to dissolve and reform elsewhere. Faces I didn't recognize swirled in that terrible countenance, their expressions locked in screams. Then, briefly, one face solidified. Weaver's, his eyes pleading, mouth working silently before being swallowed back into the darkness. The thing that wasn't a girl took another step. "What do you want from me?" I demanded, my voice breaking. The shifting face stilled. A mouth formed, too wide, filled with teeth like needles. "To wear you," it said in a voice like rustling leaves. "To walk in your skin. To see through your eyes. To return to the world below." It extended a small hand toward me. The fingertips elongated, stretching impossibly, becoming sharp black points. I slashed at them with the obsidian knife. The blade connected, and the creature recoiled with a shriek that split the dawn air. Black ichor dripped from its wounded appendages, sizzling where it struck the ground. I didn't wait to see more. I turned and ran again, choosing directions randomly, caring only about putting distance between myself and the abomination. The sky continued to lighten. Somehow, that gave me hope. These things seemed strongest in darkness. If I could stay alive until full daylight. I burst from the trees into a clearing and stopped short, heart sinking. Ahead stood the ruins of Blackwood's cabin. Somehow, I'd circled back again. No time to change direction. Something crashed through the underbrush behind me. The Weaver thing, moving faster than any human could. I sprinted across the clearing toward the cabin. I needed shelter, somewhere defensible. The cabin door frame yawned black before me. I ducked inside, searching desperately for anything useful. The interior was as I'd left it: rubble, rotting wood, and that small table with Blackwood's journal. The journal. I'd read it. I'd spoken its words aloud. Had that been the trigger? Had I done this to myself? No time to wonder. Heavy footsteps approached the cabin. I pressed myself into a corner, knife raised, as a misshapen silhouette appeared in the doorway. What had been Daniel Weaver filled the opening completely. Limbs grotesquely elongated, body hunched and twisted. Its head nearly brushed the top of the doorframe, and that terrible split now wrapped entirely around its skull, as if the top and bottom halves were held together only by the most tenuous connection. Robert," it stuttered, Weaver's voice still recognizable beneath layers of other sounds. So, alone here. Join us. Become. Stay back," I brandished the knife. The creature shuffled forward. Behind it, I could see other figures emerging from the forest. The same distorted human shapes I'd seen the night before, converging on the cabin. The thing extended a hand that now ended in foot-long bone-white talons. No escape. Only the becoming. In that moment, with sunlight beginning to stream through gaps in the cabin walls, I made a desperate decision. I lunged forward, driving the obsidian knife directly into the creature's chest. It shrieked, a sound so high and terrible I felt something rupture in my left eardrum. Black fluid gushed from the wound, spattering my hand and arm. Where it touched, my skin burned as if splashed with acid. The creature stumbled backward, clawing at the embedded knife. I shoved past it, breaking into the clearing. The other figures were closing in, but they moved sluggishly in the strengthening daylight. I ran for the tree line opposite from where I'd entered, praying it might lead to a way out of this nightmare canyon. Behind me, the wounded thing that had been Weaver howled its rage and pain. I crashed through underbrush, slid down embankments, leaped over fallen logs. The light continued to strengthen, and I imagined my pursuers falling further behind. Hope surged within me. Maybe Weaver was right. Maybe they were weaker in daylight. The trees began to thin. Ahead, I could see what appeared to be a wider trail, more established than the game paths I'd been following. Perhaps a way out? I burst onto the trail and nearly collided with a hiker coming the other direction. The man, bearded, mid-30s in full backpacking gear, jumped back in alarm. "Whoa, you okay, buddy?" I stared at him, unable to form words. A normal human being. Here. Real. "You look like hell," the hiker continued, concern growing in his expression. "Are you hurt?" I glanced down at myself. My clothes were torn and filthy. Dried blood, my own from countless scratches, mixed with the black ichor from the Weaver thing. My hands were trembling uncontrollably. My voice cracked. "I need to get out of the canyon." The hiker nodded slowly as if dealing with someone unstable. "Sure, man. Trailhead's about 4 miles that way." He pointed back the way he'd come. "You need water? First aid?" I shook my head, already moving past him. "Just need to get out. Don't go deeper. Not safe." "What's not safe?" he called after me. I didn't answer, just kept walking, then jogging, then running down the trail. Behind me, I heard the hiker mutter something about damn drugs before continuing on his way into the canyon. I should have stopped him, should have explained. But what could I say that wouldn't sound like the ravings of a madman? And I couldn't stop, couldn't risk being in this place one moment longer than necessary. I ran until my legs threatened to buckle, then forced myself to keep moving at a walk. The trail was clearly marked now, a proper hiking path. Signs of civilization began to appear. Carved trail markers, the occasional bench. When the ranger station came into view through the trees, I nearly wept with relief. I stumbled into the parking lot, drawing concerned stares from a family unloading gear from their SUV. The same ranger who had checked me in looked up in shock as I burst through the door. He was on his feet immediately, coming around the counter to catch me as my legs finally gave out. "Jesus Christ," he muttered, helping me to a chair. "What happened to you?" I tried to explain. The voices, the cabin, Weaver, the things in the forest. But the words jumbled together incoherently. The ranger's face grew increasingly concerned. "Stay here," he said firmly. "I'm calling for medical assistance." As he stepped away to use the radio, I noticed something on the wall behind the counter. A missing persons board, dotted with faded flyers and photographs. One in particular caught my eye. I staggered to my feet, ignoring the ranger's protest, and moved closer to examine it. The photo showed a bearded man in his 40s, smiling at the camera. "Missing," the headline read. "Dr. Daniel Weaver, anthropologist. Last seen April 12, 2003, Pike National Forest." 21 years ago, the man in the photo was undeniably the same Weaver who had sheltered me in his cave, but 2 decades younger. My mind reeled with the implications. How had he survived alone in the wilderness for so long? What had sustained him? What had he been running from? Or staying close to? The ranger returned to find me staring at the flyer. "Ambulance is on its way," he said, then followed my gaze. "Ah, poor Weaver. Poor. One of our cold cases, academic type, came to study local folklore, went hiking and never came back." "What kind of folklore?" My voice was barely a whisper. The ranger shrugged. "Old mining town superstitions, stories about Echo Canyon being haunted, settlers who disappeared, the usual backwoods myths." "The Blackwood family," I said. 1888. He looked surprised. "Yeah, that's one of them. Family vanished without a trace. How'd you know about that?" I didn't answer. My attention had shifted to another part of the wall, a map of the forest. Echo Canyon was clearly marked, but something was wrong. The canyon I'd spent 2 nightmarish days in was easily 3 times larger than what appeared on the map. "This map," I said, pointing with a shaking hand. "It's wrong." The ranger glanced at it. "No, that's accurate, updated last year." "But the canyon, I was miles in. There was a lake." "Echo Canyon is less than a mile deep," he interrupted, frowning. "No lake, just a box canyon with some old mining ruins. Popular day hike." The room seemed to tilt around me. Had I been hallucinating? Drugged somehow? But no, the physical evidence was real. My torn clothes, the wounds on my body, the black stains on my skin that were already beginning to blister. The ranger was speaking again, something about dehydration and rescue protocols, but his voice seemed to come from very far away. Blood rushed in my ears as a terrible suspicion formed. "The other hiker," I interrupted. "The one I passed on the trail. You need to send someone after him." "What other hiker?" "Bearded guy, backpacking gear, headed into the canyon this morning." The ranger's frown deepened. "Nobody signed in for Echo Canyon today except a family that just arrived." My blood ran cold. "Check the trail cameras," I insisted, my voice rising. "He was real. I spoke to him." To humor me, the ranger pulled up the trail camera feed on his computer. We watched as hikers came and went throughout the morning. The family I'd seen in the parking lot appeared, followed by footage of me stumbling down the trail. No other hiker. "But that's impossible," I whispered. "I passed him, spoke to him." The ranger was looking at me with open concern now. "Sir, you need medical attention. You might be experiencing—" "I know what I saw," I shouted, panic rising again. He was real. Weaver was real. Everything in that canyon was real. As the words left my mouth, the lights in the ranger station flickered. Just once, quickly, but enough to stop both of us mid-conversation. "Power surge," the ranger muttered. "Happens sometimes." But I wasn't looking at the lights. I was looking past him, out the window, where a small figure stood at the forest's edge. A little girl in a white nightgown, dark hair hiding her face. She raised her head slowly, and even at this distance I could see her face, a swirling darkness that momentarily formed a familiar countenance. The bearded hiker I'd met on the trail smiled at me with too many teeth. Then it changed again, becoming Thomas Blackwood, Eleanor, their children, Weaver, and countless faces I didn't recognize, all swirling in that impossible visage, all wearing the same hungry expression. One small hand raised in a wave. A promise. It had found a way out. Through me. 2 weeks have passed since my rescue. The doctors treated me for exposure, dehydration, and numerous lacerations. The black stains on my skin they diagnosed as chemical burns of unknown origin, perhaps from toxic plants or minerals in the canyon. The burns healed slowly, leaving strange iridescent scars that sometimes seem to shift when I'm not looking directly at them. The official report lists me as having been lost and confused due to dehydration. No mention of Daniel Weaver, whose disappearance remains unsolved. No mention of the Blackwood cabin, which no search party could locate. No mention of cairns with strange symbols, or a cave filled with bones, or a lake that doesn't exist on any map. I've tried to forget, to move on. I return to my apartment, to my job. I take the medications they prescribed for trauma-induced hallucinations. I see a therapist twice weekly who encourages me to process my survival experience and the metaphorical monsters my mind created to cope with extreme stress. I almost believe them. Almost. Except for the whispers I hear when I'm alone. The figures I glimpse from the corner of my eye, standing too still, watching. The dreams of a hungry darkness spreading beneath familiar skin. Last night, I woke to find myself standing in my kitchen, a knife in hand, staring at my reflection in the window. But it wasn't my face looking back at me. It was a shifting, swirling darkness filled with screaming mouths. I've barricaded my doors, covered my windows. But locks won't help. The hunger is already inside me, growing stronger every night. I feel it moving beneath my skin when I sleep. I'm writing this now, while I'm still mostly myself, while I can still warn others. Stay away from Echo Canyon. Stay away from the marked trails. If you hear voices calling your name in the wilderness, run. If you see cairns with strange symbols, turn back. The hungry thing is patient. It has waited centuries. And now it has found a way out. It's wearing my skin. And soon, very soon, it will be wearing yours. My name is Jason Adams, and I am 34 years old. This happened in Montana's Bitterroot Range just 3 months ago, though it feels like another lifetime. I'd always been the city guy among my friends, the one who preferred air conditioning and Wi-Fi to tents and campfires. But after my divorce finalized, something snapped in me. I needed to get away, to prove to myself that I could handle something challenging on my own. That's why I decided on a solo backpacking trip in the Bitterroot Mountains, specifically near the remote Echo Lake area. It was supposed to be a week of solitude, self-reflection, and healing. I'd researched the trail extensively. It wasn't considered particularly difficult for experienced hikers, but I wasn't experienced. Still, my therapist had encouraged me to push my boundaries, to reclaim my independence after 5 years with Elaine. The trail would take me through dense forest, past alpine meadows, and eventually to a secluded lake where, according to reviews, the stars reflected off the water like a second sky. The first day went well enough. I parked my rental car at the Blodgett Canyon trailhead, double-checked my pack, and started the ascent. The weight of my backpack was uncomfortable but not unbearable, and I felt a surge of accomplishment with each mile marker I passed. The weather was perfect. Clear blue skies, mild temperature with just enough breeze to keep the mosquitoes away. By late afternoon, I'd reached my first designated camping area, a small clearing near Blodgett Creek. I set up camp without much trouble, following the instructions I'd memorized from YouTube tutorials. As I sat by my small fire, eating a dehydrated pasta meal that tasted better than it had any right to, I felt the knot in my chest, the one that had been there since Elaine said she didn't love me anymore, begin to loosen. The sounds of the forest, rustling leaves, the gurgle of the creek, distant bird calls, created a symphony so different from the traffic and sirens of Chicago that I almost felt like a different person. That night, I slept better than I had in months. Day 2 started with soreness in muscles I didn't know I had, but also with a sense of excitement. Today, I would reach Echo Lake, my main destination. The trail became steeper, switching back and forth across the mountainside. By midday, my legs were burning, and I was stopping more frequently to catch my breath. But the views, the views made it worth it. The valley stretched out below me, an endless carpet of evergreens, and in the distance, snow-capped peaks pierced the sky. It was during one of these rest breaks that I first felt something was off. I'd stopped at a small outcropping that offered a panoramic view of the valley. As I drank from my water bottle, I noticed movement from the corner of my eye, something large and dark slipping between trees about 50 yards down the slope. I squinted, trying to see better, but whatever it was had vanished. A bear, I thought, remembering the warnings about grizzlies in the area. I felt for the bear spray attached to my belt and decided to be more vigilant. I reached Echo Lake by late afternoon. The water was crystal clear, reflecting the surrounding mountains and forest like a mirror. The designated camping area was empty, not surprising for a Tuesday in early October. I set up my tent on a flat spot about 20 yards from the shore, gathered firewood, and prepared my dinner as the sun began to set. That's when I heard it for the first time, the echo that gave the lake its name, but not a natural one. It sounded like a voice, distant and hollow, repeating words I couldn't quite make out. I looked around, assuming another hiker was nearby, but I saw no one. The voice came again, slightly clearer this time, but still unintelligible. It seemed to be coming from across the lake, yet there was no one there, just trees and the sheer rock face of Echo Mountain rising beyond. "Hello," I called out. My voice bounced off the mountain and returned to me. "Hello, hello, hello." But beneath my echo, I heard that other voice again, and this time I could almost make out words. "Come, find me." I shuddered involuntarily. The temperature seemed to drop several degrees in an instant. I told myself it was just my imagination, or maybe another hiker playing a prank. I finished my dinner quickly and crawled into my tent earlier than planned. Inside my sleeping bag, I scrolled through photos on my phone, mostly screenshots of maps and trail guides. Since I had no service, The battery was down to 63% despite starting the day at full charge. I'd brought a solar charger, but it had been less effective than advertised. I turned off my phone to conserve power and tried to sleep. That night, I dreamed of walking through an endless forest. No matter which direction I turned, the trees looked identical, and I had the distinct feeling I was moving in circles. In the dream, I could hear that voice again, clearer now. Jason. Come find me, Jason. I woke with a start, my heart racing. The inside of my tent was illuminated by moonlight, casting everything in a pale blue glow. I lay still, listening. The night was silent except for the gentle lapping of water against the shore and the occasional rustle of leaves in the breeze. Then I heard footsteps, slow, deliberate footsteps circling my tent. I froze, barely breathing. The footsteps completed one circuit around my tent, then stopped directly in front of the zippered entrance. I watched in horror as the zipper began to move, slowly pulling upward. I lunged forward, grabbing the zipper from the inside and holding it down. "Who's there?" I demanded, trying to sound braver than I felt. No response, no more movement from the zipper, no sound of breathing or footsteps. After what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, I worked up the courage to pull back the tent flap and look outside. The clearing was empty. The moon hung full and bright above, casting strong shadows from the trees surrounding the lake. I stepped out, the cold earth sending shivers through my sock-covered feet. I did a complete 360, scanning the tree line, but saw nothing unusual. I was about to go back inside when something caught my eye. Footprints in the soft earth around my tent. They formed a perfect circle, as if someone had methodically walked around my tent exactly once. But the prints weren't from hiking boots or shoes. They looked like bare feet, impossibly large bare feet with elongated toes. Sleep was out of the question after that. I sat inside my tent with my flashlight on and my pocket knife open beside me until the first light of dawn filtered through the nylon walls. Only then did I venture outside again. In the gray morning light, there were no footprints to be seen. The ground around my tent was undisturbed. I should have packed up and headed back to the trailhead right then. Something in my gut was screaming at me to leave. But I'd come all this way, and the rational part of my brain insisted that I'd just had a vivid nightmare, that the footprints had been a hallucination brought on by stress and unfamiliar surroundings. So I stayed. I made coffee on my portable stove and forced down a granola bar, watching the mist rise from the lake's surface as the sun climbed higher. I decided to spend the day exploring the area around Echo Lake, telling myself that physical activity would clear my head. I packed a small day bag with water, snacks, my first aid kit, and, as an afterthought, my bear spray. The trail around the lake was well marked at first, winding through stands of lodgepole pine and across small streams fed by mountain snowmelt. But as I reached the far side of the lake, opposite my campsite, the trail began to fade, becoming harder to distinguish from game paths. That's when I found the cabin. It shouldn't have been there. None of my maps or trail guides had mentioned any structures in this area. It stood in a small clearing about 100 yards from the lake shore. A simple one-room log cabin with a sagging roof and a crooked stone chimney. No smoke rose from the chimney, and the single window I could see from my position was dark. I approached cautiously, listening for any sounds of habitation. The clearing was silent except for the buzz of insects and the distant calls of birds. The cabin door hung slightly ajar, its weathered wood split in places. I stopped a few feet away and called out, "Hello? Anyone home?" No answer. I pushed the door open wider with the toe of my boot. It swung inward with a long, low creak. The interior was dim, dust motes dancing in the thin shafts of light that penetrated through cracks in the walls. The cabin consisted of one room with a small stone fireplace, a rough wooden table with a single chair, a narrow bed frame with no mattress, and shelves built into the walls. A thick layer of dust covered everything, but not undisturbed. There were tracks in the dust on the floor, the same large, bare footprints I'd seen, or thought I'd seen, around my tent. On the table sat an old leather-bound book, its cover cracked and faded. Beside it was what looked like a small animal skull, perhaps a raccoon or a fox, and a mason jar filled with a dark liquid. I stepped closer, drawn by curiosity despite my growing unease. The book was a journal. I hesitated, then opened it to the first page. The handwriting was cramped and angular, the ink faded to brown. October 2nd, 1958. Found the perfect spot. The isolation is complete. No one will find me here. The silence speaks to me. I can finally hear her voice clearly. I flipped through more pages. Most entries were short, describing daily survival tasks and increasingly strange observations about the lake and surrounding forest. The writer, who never signed their name, described hearing voices from the lake, seeing faces in the water, and encountering a tall visitor in the night. The final entry, dated October 31st, 1958, read simply, "She is coming for me tonight. I have prepared the offering. She promises to make me like her. No more cold, no more hunger, no more loneliness." I closed the book, my hands trembling slightly. I backed away from the table, suddenly anxious to be out of the cabin. As I turned to leave, my eyes fell on something I'd missed when I entered, a photograph tacked to the wall beside the door. The black and white image showed a man standing by Echo Lake, the distinctive profile of Echo Mountain visible in the background. He was thin to the point of emaciation, with a wild beard and eyes that seemed to stare through the camera rather than at it. But what made my blood run cold was his stance, the way his head was tilted at an unnatural angle and the strange elongation of his fingers, which seemed too long, too thin to be human. And behind him, barely visible at the edge of the frame, was a woman's silhouette in the water. Not a reflection, but a figure rising from the lake itself. I stumbled backward, knocking into the table. The jar toppled over, its lid coming loose. The dark liquid, blood, I realized with horror, spilled across the table and dripped onto the floor. The coppery smell filled the cabin instantly. I ran. Out the door, through the clearing, back toward the lake trail. I ran until my lungs burned and my legs threatened to give out. When I finally stopped, gasping for breath, I realized I had no idea where I was. The trail was gone. The lake was nowhere in sight, just endless trees in every direction, their branches blocking most of the midday sun. I pulled out my phone to check the GPS, but the battery was dead. Of course it was. I tried to orient myself using the position of the sun, but the forest canopy was too thick to get a clear bearing. I picked a direction that I thought would lead back to the lake and started walking, trying to maintain a straight line. Hours passed. The forest remained unchanging. The same types of trees, the same undergrowth, the same filtered green light. My water bottle was half empty, and my mouth was dry from fear and exertion. As the afternoon wore on, panic began to set in. I was lost in the Bitterroot wilderness, and no one knew exactly where I was or when to expect me back. Then I heard it. The voice from my dream. From the lake. "Jason. This way, Jason." It came from somewhere to my left. Against all better judgment, I followed it. What choice did I have? If it was another hiker, they might help me find my way back. The voice led me to a small stream. I followed it downstream, reasoning that it must flow into Echo Lake eventually. The terrain became steeper, the stream picking up speed and volume as other tributaries joined it. Ahead, I could see the trees thinning out, suggesting a clearing or the lakeshore. I hurried forward, relief flooding through me. But when I broke through the tree line, what I saw wasn't Echo Lake. It was a sinkhole, a perfectly circular depression about 30 feet across. The stream poured into it, creating a swirling vortex that disappeared into darkness. And standing on the opposite side of the sinkhole was a figure. At first glance, it appeared to be a woman in a long, dark dress, her hair hanging wet and heavy around her face. But as I stared, I realized something was wrong with her proportions. Her arms were too long, her fingers ending in points rather than nails. Her neck bent at an impossible angle, allowing her head to twist almost completely backward. And her face, what I could see of it through the curtain of dripping hair, was wrong. The mouth stretched too wide, the eyes too far apart. "Who are you?" I called out, my voice breaking. The figure's head snapped forward, and now I could see her face clearly. It was the face from the photograph, but decayed. The skin stretched tight over prominent bones, the eyes sunken and glossy black. "I am Eleanor," the voice said, though her mouth didn't move. "The mountain has given me many names over the years. The Hag of Echo Lake, the Lady of the Deep, but you may call me Eleanor." She began to move around the edge of the sinkhole toward me, her movements jerky and unnatural like a puppet with tangled strings. "I've been waiting for you, Jason Adams. Ever since you decided to come here, I've been waiting. Your pain called to me, your loneliness, your desire to prove yourself." I backed away, but my heel caught on a root, and I fell hard onto my back. By the time I scrambled to my feet, she was closer, close enough that I could smell her. Oh, a combination of stagnant water and decay. "The last one didn't last long," she continued, gesturing vaguely in what I assumed was the direction of the cabin. 50 years is nothing to me. I need someone new, someone to keep me company in the deep." I turned and ran. Back into the forest, crashing through underbrush, branches whipping my face and arms. I ran until a stitch in my side forced me to stop, doubling over in pain. When I straightened and looked back, Eleanor was standing 10 feet away, watching me with those black, empty eyes. "You cannot outrun me in my forest, Jason Adams." I fumbled for my bear spray, pointed it at her, and pressed the trigger. The spray hit her full in the face, but she didn't flinch. She didn't even blink. She just smiled, her mouth opening wider than any human mouth should, revealing rows of needle-like teeth. "That won't work on me. I'm not alive, you see." I backed away again, my mind racing. If she wasn't alive, what was she? A ghost? Some kind of forest spirit? The journal in the cabin had mentioned an offering. What kind of offering would satisfy a creature like this? "What do you want?" I asked, playing for time. "Company," she replied simply. "It gets lonely in the deep. I need someone to share the silence with me." "The man in the cabin, he offered himself to you." "Oh yes, William was eager to join me, so eager. But humans are so fragile even when I change them. Their minds break, their bodies fail. Eventually, they're just empty shells." She took another step toward me. I realized we had somehow circled back to the sinkhole. It was just behind me now, the rush of water into its depths creating a constant background roar. "But you're different, Jason. You're already broken. By life, by love. You came here seeking something. Let me give it to you." She reached out one elongated hand, the fingers extending impossibly, stretching toward my face. I jerked back instinctively and felt my heels at the very edge of the sinkhole. One more step back and I would fall into that swirling darkness. A calm settled over me then, a strange clarity. I knew what I had to do. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my wallet. From behind my driver's license, I removed the one photo of Elaine I still carried, a snapshot from our honeymoon in Mexico, her smile bright in the sunshine. "You want an offering?" I said. "How about a different kind of company?" I held out the photo. Eleanor hesitated, her hand withdrawing slightly. "What is this?" "Her name is Elaine. She broke me, like you said. Take her instead. Take her name. Take her face. Take her soul." Eleanor's head tilted, studying the photograph. Then, moving with that same unsettling jerky motion, she reached out and took the photo from my hand. As her fingers closed around it, the paper began to blacken and curl, as if being burned from the inside out. "Interesting," she murmured. "I can feel her through your memory of her. So much life, so much warmth. While she was distracted, I edged sideways away from the sinkhole, preparing to run again. But Eleanor's free hand shot out, grabbing my wrist. Her touch was ice-cold and slick, like grabbing a dead fish. "Did you think it would be so easy?" she hissed. "A photo for your life? No, Jason Adams. I'll take her, yes, but I'll take you too." She pulled me toward her with inhuman strength. I dug my heels into the earth, but it was like trying to resist a tidal wave. As she drew me closer, her face began to change, the features shifting and reforming until I was looking at a grotesque, waterlogged version of Elaine's face. "Don't you want to be with your wife again?" she asked in Elaine's voice, a horrible parody of the woman I'd once loved. "You're not her," I gasped, still struggling. "I can be," she insisted. "I can be anyone you want. We'll be together in the deep. Forever." Her grip on my wrist tightened until I felt bones grinding together. With my free hand, I reached for anything that might help. A rock, a stick, anything to use as a weapon. My fingers closed around something in my pocket, my lighter. In desperation, I flicked it open and struck the flame. Eleanor's eyes widened at the sudden light. I thrust the flame toward her face, Elaine's face, and she recoiled with a shriek that sounded like metal tearing. Her grip loosened just enough for me to wrench my arm free. I didn't hesitate. I pulled out the trail map I kept in my breast pocket, crumpled it into a ball, and set it alight. Then I threw it at Eleanor. The burning paper caught on her wet hair and dress, which shouldn't have been possible. Wet things don't burn. But Eleanor wasn't natural. And apparently, whatever she was, she feared fire. The flames spread across her form with unnatural speed, engulfing her in seconds. She screamed, a sound no human throat could produce, a harmonizing of dozens of voices in agony. As she burned, her shape began to disintegrate, melting like wax and flowing toward the sinkhole. "This isn't over," her voice echoed in my head. "I am eternal. I am the deep, and the deep always hungers." Then she was gone, a smoldering mass sliding into the swirling waters of the sinkhole, leaving nothing behind but the acrid smell of smoke and a dampness in the air. I collapsed to my knees, exhausted and in shock. As the adrenaline faded, pain flooded in. My wrist was badly bruised, possibly fractured, and I was covered in scratches and cuts from my panicked flight through the forest. But I was alive. I don't know how long I sat there, trying to process what had happened. Eventually, the setting sun roused me from my stupor. I needed to find my way back to camp before dark. Without a GPS or working phone, I had to rely on basic wilderness skills. The stream had led me to the sinkhole, so following it upstream might lead me back toward Echo Lake. It was nearly dark by the time I stumbled back onto the shores of Echo Lake. My tent was still there, undisturbed. I wanted nothing more than to pack up and hike out immediately, but night hiking in grizzly country with a possibly broken wrist was suicide. I had no choice but to spend one more night. I didn't bother with a fire. I just crawled into my tent, zipped it up tight, and lay awake, knife in hand, listening to every sound outside. At some point, exhaustion won out, and I fell into a fitful sleep. I dreamed of the deep, of sinking through black water, down and down, past the remains of others who had been taken, skeletal figures reaching out as I descended, their jaws working silently, their eye sockets empty and accusing. And at the very bottom, Eleanor waited, her form shifting between the hag I'd seen, Elaine's face, and something older, something that had existed in these mountains long before humans arrived. "Come join us, Jason," the voices called. "It's peaceful in the deep. No more pain, no more struggle, just silence and darkness and rest." I woke to bright sunlight filtering through my tent. For a moment I was disoriented, the nightmare still clinging to the edges of my consciousness. Then the events of the previous day came rushing back, and I sat up with a gasp. My wrist was swollen and discolored but functional. I packed up camp in record time, wincing with every movement. As I shouldered my backpack and took one last look at Echo Lake, I noticed something I'd missed before. The water level had dropped overnight, exposing more of the shoreline. And there, in the newly revealed mud, were footprints. Dozens of them. Some human, some decidedly not. All leading into the water. I hiked out faster than I'd thought possible, my fear overriding the pain and exhaustion. When I reached the trailhead and saw my rental car sitting there untouched, I nearly wept with relief. The drive back to Missoula was a blur. At the first clinic I found, a doctor set my wrist, a hairline fracture as I'd suspected, and cleaned my various cuts and scrapes. When she asked what happened, I mumbled something about falling on the trail. She gave me a skeptical look but didn't press the issue. That night, in the safety of a hotel room with the lights on and the TV playing in the background, I finally allowed myself to think about what I'd experienced. Had it been real? Or had I suffered some kind of breakdown, hallucinating the whole thing due to stress and isolation? The rational explanation was tempting, but my broken wrist was real. And when I emptied my backpack, I found something I couldn't explain. A single page torn from that old journal, stuck in the lining of my pack. The handwriting was the same cramped scrawl I remembered, but the ink looked fresh. She never lets anyone go completely. A piece of her comes with you. A piece of you stays with her. The hunger always returns. And when it does, you'll find your way back to Echo Lake. I burned the page in the hotel sink that night. I told myself it was just an elaborate prank by some local who got their kick scaring hikers. I told myself a lot of things in the days that followed. 3 months have passed. My wrist has healed. I've returned to Chicago, to my job, to what passes for normal life. But the dreams haven't stopped. Almost every night I'm back at Echo Lake, sinking into its depths. And lately, I've started to notice changes in myself. Food tastes like ash in my mouth. I'm always thirsty, but water doesn't satisfy me. My fingers seem longer, thinner when I stare at them too long. And sometimes, catching my reflection in a window or mirror, I see something else looking back, just for an instant, before my familiar face returns. Last week, I booked a flight back to Montana. I tell myself it's to face my fears, to prove to myself that what happened wasn't real. But deep down, I know the truth. Eleanor is calling me home, and this time I won't resist the deep. My name is Michael Williams, and I am 34 years old. This happened in the remote woods of the Cohutta Wilderness area in northern Georgia, just last summer. I should have known better than to go alone, but after my divorce, I needed space. Time away from everything to clear my head. I'd always been an experienced hiker, having tackled portions of the Appalachian Trail multiple times, so a solo weekend camping trip didn't seem particularly risky. I chose a lesser-known trail that branched off from the Jacks River Falls path, one that would take me deeper into the wilderness than most day hikers ventured. The ranger at the station gave me an odd look when I mentioned my destination, but I attributed it to concern over a solo hiker going so far from the main trails. "Not many folks go out that way," she said, stamping my permit. "Cell service disappears about 3 miles in, and the terrain gets unpredictable after the old logging road ends." "That's exactly what I'm looking for," I replied with a confidence I would later regret. "Just me and the wilderness." She hesitated before handing me back my permit. "There have been some strange reports from hikers in that area. Probably nothing, but—" She trailed off, then added, "Just stick to the marked paths and be back when you say you will." I nodded, barely registering her warning. My mind was still replaying the final argument with Elaine, my ex-wife. After 5 years of marriage, it had ended with her screaming that I was emotionally unavailable, that I retreated into myself whenever things got difficult. Maybe she was right. Maybe that's exactly what I was doing now. The first day's hike was uneventful but beautiful. Georgia's summer was in full swing, and the forest was alive with color and sound. The trail gradually became narrower and less defined as I moved away from the popular areas. By late afternoon, I had reached a small clearing beside a creek that seemed perfect for setting up camp. I had hiked about 7 miles from the trailhead, far enough that I hadn't seen another person for hours. As I set up my tent, I noticed unusual scratch marks on several tree trunks surrounding the clearing. They were too high to be from a bear, unless it had stood on its hind legs, and too patterned to be natural, almost like symbols. I ran my fingers over the grooves, feeling an inexplicable chill despite the warm air. That night, I built a small fire and sat listening to the sounds of the forest. The usual nocturnal chorus of insects and frogs provided a soothing background as I sipped whiskey from my metal cup. But as darkness fully settled, I became aware of the forest's shifting acoustics. The normal nighttime sounds gradually diminished until an unnatural silence pressed in around my small camp. I added more wood to the fire, trying to dispel the growing sense of unease. The flames cast dancing shadows across the clearing, and for a moment, I thought I saw movement at the edge of the light, something tall and thin slipping between trees. I squinted, but there was nothing there. Just my imagination, I told myself, fueled by isolation and whiskey. Around midnight, I crawled into my tent, exhausted but unsettled. Sleep came fitfully, punctuated by strange dreams of being watched. I woke several times, convinced I had heard my name whispered just outside the thin nylon walls of my tent. When morning finally came, I emerged to find my campsite undisturbed, yet something felt off. The fire had died completely, not even embers remained, though I was certain I had banked it properly. More disturbing were the footprints. Not animal tracks, but what appeared to be bare human footprints circling my tent. They were deep impressions in the soft earth, yet oddly distorted, as if whoever or whatever had made them had an unusual gait. I told myself there must be a rational explanation. Perhaps another hiker had wandered through while I slept. But why would they circle my tent? And why barefoot in such rugged terrain? I packed quickly, deciding to push deeper into the wilderness rather than turn back. Pride, perhaps, or simple stubbornness. I wasn't going to let vague uneasiness cut my trip short. The second day's hike took me through increasingly dense forest. The trail became harder to follow, sometimes disappearing entirely among fallen trees and thick underbrush. Several times I had to check my compass to ensure I was still heading in the right direction. The forest itself seemed to resist my presence, branches catching on my pack, roots emerging unexpectedly to trip me. By midday, I reached a small, stagnant pond that wasn't marked on my map. The water was dark and still, with no visible wildlife. Not even insects skimmed its surface. Around its edges grew unusual fungi, pale, fleshy growths that resembled human ears. My skin crawled at the sight, but I was running low on water and needed to refill my bottles. I approached cautiously, kneeling at the edge to test the water with my purifier. As I leaned forward, I caught sight of my reflection, except it wasn't quite right. The face that stared back at me was gaunt, with sunken eyes and a twisted smile I wasn't wearing. I jerked back, heart pounding, and the reflection rippled back to normal. "Just a trick of the light," I muttered aloud, my voice sounding thin and foreign in the dense air. I decided against using the pond water and pressed on, rationing what I had left. The trail continued to deteriorate, and by late afternoon, I was essentially bushwhacking. According to my map, there should have been another clearing suitable for camping about 2 miles ahead, near a stream that fed into Jack's River. The shadows lengthened as I hiked, and the forest grew increasingly quiet. No birds called, no squirrels rustled in the canopy above. Just the sound of my own labored breathing and the crunch of leaves beneath my boots. I checked my watch, 4:30 p.m. I had maybe 2 hours of good light left, and I still hadn't found the clearing. Then I heard it, a woman's voice, faint but distinct, calling for help. "Hello?" I called back, dropping my pack and turning in a circle trying to locate the source. "Where are you?" The voice came again, seemingly from multiple directions at once. "Help me, please." I followed the sound, moving away from what remained of the trail and into the thick undergrowth. Branches whipped at my face as I pushed through, calling out periodically. The voice continued, always just ahead, always just out of sight. After what felt like 20 minutes of pursuit, I broke through into a small clearing. But not the one I had been looking for. This one was perfectly circular, as if artificially created. At its center stood a crude structure made of sticks and bones lashed together with what looked disturbingly like human hair. It resembled a primitive altar or shrine. The voice had stopped. I approached the structure cautiously, my mouth dry with fear. Hanging from the central frame was a small burlap doll with button eyes and red thread stitched across its mouth. As I drew closer, I noticed photographs pinned to the structure with thorns, worn and weathered images of hikers, some seemingly decades old, judging by the clothing styles. With mounting horror, I realized they were all solo hikers, men and women standing proudly at trailheads or beside waterfalls, smiling into the camera. And then I saw it, a fresh photograph, pinned at the very top. It was me, taken that very morning as I started my hike. I was standing beside my car at the trailhead, adjusting my pack, a photo that couldn't possibly exist because there had been no one else there to take it. My heart hammered against my ribs as I backed away from the shrine. I turned to flee and found myself face to face with an old woman. She hadn't been there seconds before. She had simply appeared, standing barely 3 feet away. Her appearance was startling in its incongruity. She wore what might once have been normal hiking clothes, but they were now tattered and stained, hanging from her emaciated frame. Her white hair hung in matted tangles around a face so deeply lined it barely seemed human. But it was her eyes that froze me in place, milky white with cataracts yet somehow still fixed intently on me. "You shouldn't be here," she said, her voice nothing like the one that had lured me to the clearing. This voice was dry and cracked, like dead leaves underfoot. "Not yet. I wasn't ready for you." I tried to speak but found my voice trapped in my throat. The old woman tilted her head, studying me with those blind-looking eyes. "You're running from something," she said. It wasn't a question. They always are. Running from loss, from pain, from themselves. She took a shuffling step toward me. "But you can't outrun what's inside you, Michael." The use of my name broke my paralysis. "Who are you?" I managed to ask. "How do you know my name?" She smiled, revealing teeth that had been filed to points. "I'm Agnes. I know all about you. I've been watching since you entered my woods." "Your woods? This is national forest land," I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt, slowly edging toward what I hoped was the direction back to the trail. Agnes laughed, a sound like bones breaking. "Deeds and maps don't matter here. These woods have been mine since before your grandparents were born. I protect them from people like you who come to escape, to hide from what haunts them." She gestured toward the shrine. "They all came running from something, just like you're running from the pain of your failed marriage, from the guilt of not being what she needed." Ice flooded my veins. There was no way she could know about Elaine, about our divorce, unless... "You've been following me," I accused, anger momentarily overwhelming fear. "I don't need to follow. The trees tell me. The wind carries your thoughts to me." She tapped her temple with a gnarled finger. "I see what's in your mind, Michael. I see the darkness you hide from others." The clearing seemed to darken around us, though the sun hadn't yet set. Agnes moved closer, and I caught a scent of decay emanating from her. "What do you want?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Want? I want what I always want. Company. These woods get so lonely." She gestured at the shrine again. "They all stay with me now. Forever. But they're not very good conversationalists anymore." Her laugh turned into a wet, hacking cough. I took advantage of her momentary distraction to turn and run, crashing through the underbrush in what I hoped was the direction of the trail. Behind me, Agnes's voice rose in anger, then transformed into something inhuman, a wailing screech that sent birds exploding from the trees around me. "You can run, Michael Williams, but you're already mine. These woods don't let go of what belongs to them." I ran blindly, branches tearing at my clothes and skin. My only thought was to put distance between myself and that clearing, between myself and Agnes. I had no idea where I was going, having left both my pack and compass behind in my panic. As I ran, the forest around me seemed to come alive with malevolence. Roots rose up to trip me, branches swung down to block my path. The very air thickened, making each breath a struggle. Worst of all was the sensation of being pursued, not just by Agnes, but by multiple presences that flickered at the edges of my vision. Night was falling rapidly now, much faster than it should have. One moment there was dim light filtering through the canopy. The next, an unnatural darkness closed in. I stumbled on, using my phone's flashlight to illuminate the way, though the battery was already dangerously low. After what felt like hours of desperate flight, I collapsed against a tree trunk, lungs burning. In the beam of my dying flashlight, I saw with horror that I was back at the stagnant pond I had passed earlier. Somehow, I had traveled in a circle, despite being certain I had maintained a straight course away from the clearing. My phone's light flickered and died, plunging me into complete darkness. The night sounds that should have filled the forest were absent. Instead, there was only my ragged breathing and, gradually becoming audible, the soft shuffling of approaching footsteps. "I told you," came Agnes's voice from the darkness, much closer than I expected. "The woods don't let go of what belongs to them." I pushed myself up and began to run again, this time following the edge of the pond, hoping it would lead to a stream and eventually back to civilization. The moon had risen, providing just enough light to avoid the largest obstacles. But I was running purely on instinct now, adrenaline overriding exhaustion. The shuffling footsteps continued behind me, maintaining a steady pace regardless of how fast I ran. Sometimes they seemed to recede, only to suddenly sound directly beside me. Occasionally, I caught glimpses of movement, a pale figure flitting between trees, always just at the periphery of my vision. I don't know how long I ran. Time seemed to lose meaning in that endless nightmare of darkness and pursuit. My legs burned, my lungs ached, but fear drove me onward. At some point, I became aware of the sound of running water, a stream or river nearby. Following the sound, I broke through a line of trees and found myself on the rocky bank of what had to be Jack's River. The sight of the water, silver in the moonlight, brought a surge of hope. Rivers led to civilization. If I could follow it downstream, I might find my way back to a road or campsite. As I picked my way along the riverbank, the oppressive feeling that had gripped me in the forest began to lift slightly. The air was clearer here, the moonlight stronger. For the first time in hours, I allowed myself to believe I might escape. That's when I saw them, figures standing in the river, illuminated by the moon. At first, I thought they were other hikers or campers, and I nearly called out for help. But as my eyes adjusted, I realized with mounting horror what I was seeing. They were human-shaped but wrong, emaciated bodies with elongated limbs, skin stretched tight over protruding bones. Their faces were the worst, featureless except for gaping, tooth-filled mouths that opened far wider than any human mouth should. They stood motionless in the water, facing my direction as if they had been waiting for me. I froze, afraid even to breathe. The figures remained still, water flowing around their legs. Then, as if responding to some signal I couldn't perceive, they began to move toward the bank where I stood, their movements jerky and uncoordinated. I turned to flee back into the forest but found my path blocked by Agnes. She stood directly behind me, her milky eyes now glowing faintly in the darkness. "My children are hungry," she said, her voice almost gentle. "They haven't fed in weeks." "What are they?" I asked, unable to look away from her terrible gaze. Lost souls, like you. Hikers who strayed too far from the path. But they stayed too long in my woods, and the woods changed them. She reached out a hand toward my face. The woods change everyone eventually. I recoiled from her touch, nearly losing my balance on the rocky bank. Behind me, I could hear the splashing of the river creatures as they drew closer. "Why are you doing this?" I demanded, trying to keep my voice steady. Agnes tilted her head, considering me. "I was abandoned here long ago. Left to die by a husband who decided I was too much trouble. The woods took pity on me, gave me power, gave me purpose." Her voice hardened, "And in return, I feed them. The lost, the broken, the ones running from their pain. They sustain us." "I'm not running," I said, though we both knew it was a lie. "Aren't you?" Elaine knew. She saw how you retreated, how you built walls instead of bridges. Agnes's voice changed then, becoming a perfect imitation of my ex-wife's. "You're never really there, Michael. Even when you're standing right in front of me, you're 1,000 miles away." The sound of Elaine's voice coming from that monstrous figure broke something in me. Rage replaced fear, and I lunged forward, shoving Agnes with all my strength. She was surprisingly solid for someone who looked so frail, but the force of my attack was enough to send her stumbling backward. She fell with a cry of surprise, her head striking a rock with a sickening crack. I didn't wait to see if she was dead or merely injured. I turned back to the river, where the creatures, Agnes's children, were now almost at the bank. In a desperate gamble, I waded into the water, pushing past them toward the deeper channel. Their hands grabbed at me, cold and strong, but the current helped pull me from their grasp. The water was frigid despite the summer heat, and the current stronger than I anticipated. Within moments, I was being swept downstream, fighting to keep my head above water as the river carried me away from Agnes and her monstrosities. I don't remember much of that wild ride downstream. The river tossed me against rocks, pulled me under repeatedly, and nearly drowned me more than once. But eventually the current slowed, and I managed to drag myself onto a sandbar, coughing up river water and shaking with cold and exhaustion. Dawn was breaking, the first light of day turning the eastern sky a pale gray. I lay on the sand, too spent to move, watching as the forest around me gradually took shape in the growing light. It looked normal now, just trees and undergrowth, with birds beginning their morning songs. When I finally found the strength to stand, I realized I had been carried several miles downstream. In the distance, I could see what appeared to be a bridge, a road crossing the river. Civilization. It took me most of the morning to reach that bridge. My clothes were torn, my body covered in cuts and bruises. I must have looked like a madman to the startled fisherman who found me stumbling along the roadside, but he was kind enough to drive me to the nearest ranger station. I told the rangers I had gotten lost and fallen into the river. A simple, believable story that didn't include old women with filed teeth or creatures standing in the water. They nodded sympathetically, gave me dry clothes and hot coffee, and arranged for me to be taken back to my car at the trailhead. As we drove, the ranger mentioned that hikers occasionally reported strange experiences in the deeper parts of the Cohuta wilderness. "There's an old story about a woman named Agnes Thorne," he said, keeping his eyes on the winding road. "Supposedly, she was abandoned by her husband in those woods back in the 1930s. Some say she turned to witchcraft to survive, made some kind of deal with, well, something not natural." I said nothing, my hands trembling around the coffee cup. "Of course, that's just an old legend," he continued. "Probably started because they never found her body. But some hikers swear they've seen an old woman out there, far from any trail. Always alone, always watching." When we reached my car, I thanked him and prepared to leave. As I was about to drive away, he leaned in my window. "You know, it's funny," he said, a slight frown creasing his forehead. "You're the third solo hiker this month who's come out of those woods looking like they've seen a ghost. The others left immediately, wouldn't talk about what happened." I forced a smile. "Just got lost? Could happen to anyone." He nodded slowly. "Sure. But maybe next time, don't hike alone. The wilderness can play tricks on a solitary mind. I've thought about his words often in the months since then. Was it all in my mind? A hallucination brought on by isolation, exhaustion, and lingering depression over my failed marriage? Sometimes I almost convince myself that's the case. Almost. But then I remember Agnes's eyes, the way she knew things about me, about Elaine. I remember the shrine with its photos of solitary hikers, and I remember the creatures in the river, waiting with infinite patience for their next meal. I don't know if Agnes survived our encounter. Part of me hopes she didn't, that her reign of terror in those woods has ended. But a deeper part knows better. The woods protected her once. They probably did so again. I haven't returned to hiking. In fact, I've moved away from Georgia entirely, trying to put as much distance as possible between myself and the Cohutta wilderness. I've reconnected with Elaine, not romantically, but as friends. She was right about me retreating from emotional connection, and I'm working on that now. But sometimes, on dark nights when the wind moves through the trees outside my window, I swear I can hear Agnes's voice calling my name. And I know, with bone-deep certainty, that if I ever return to those woods, I'll never leave them again. The forest doesn't let go of what belongs to it, and in some small way, I think a part of me will always belong to those dark woods and the ancient evil that dwells within them.